The bullet that killed her father wasn't meant for him. It was meant for the man who would save her life. In the blood-soaked dirt of 1875 Wyoming territory, Lila Granger made a choice that would change everything. Trust a wanted man or die alone in the wilderness. What she didn't know was that the cowboy with gentle eyes and a dark past had been watching over her long before that fatal day. This is a story of survival, secrets, and a love forged in gunfire and grief. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Wyoming sun hung low and merciless over the overturned wagon, painting everything in shades of copper and blood. Lila Granger pressed her back against the splintered wood, her father's small pistol trembling in her grip, her breath coming in short, silent gasps that burned her throat like swallowed fire. 30 feet away, 3 men rifled through her family's belongings with the casual efficiency of wolves picking at a carcass. She could hear them laughing. The sound made her stomach turn, not because it was cruel, but because it was ordinary. These men were discussing her father's pocket watch, her mother's silver hairbrush, the value of their horses, as if they hadn't just murdered a man in cold blood not 20 minutes earlier. As if John Granger's body wasn't cooling in the dirt 15 yards from where they stood, a dark stain spreading across his chest, his eyes still open to a sky he could no longer see. Lila had watched him die, had held his hand as the light left his eyes, as his lips formed words that never came, as the thunder of hoofbeats faded into the distance and left them alone with the wind and the dying. Don't move, she told herself, the words a desperate prayer. Don't breathe. Don't let them know you're here. Her father had shoved her behind the wagon in those final seconds before the bullets flew, had used his last moment of strength to hide her in the shadows, while he faced the men who'd been trailing them since Fort Laramie. She'd wanted to scream, to fight, to do something other than cower like a rabbit in the brush. But John Granger had looked at her with eyes that held 20 years of love and the certain knowledge of death, and he'd whispered one word, live. So she'd hidden. She'd bitten her lip until it bled to keep from crying out as the gunshots cracked across the prairie. She'd pressed her face into the dusty earth and listened to her father's last breath rattle from his lungs. And now she waited, heart pounding so hard she was certain they could hear it, while 3 murderers decided what to do with the wreckage of her life. Check the strong box again, one of them said, a tall man with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, the one who'd fired the first shot. Old man said he had 200 in gold. Ain't found but 30. Maybe he was lying. This from a younger man, barely older than Lila's 22 years, with nervous hands and a voice that cracked. Maybe he didn't have no gold at all. He had it. The third man spoke with absolute certainty, his voice rough as creek gravel. Saw him counted out in Fort Laramie 3 days back. 200 in gold eagles fresh from the bank. He's got it hid somewhere. Lila's fingers tightened on the pistol grip. The gold was in her dress pocket, sewn into the lining by her father's careful hands the night before they'd left Fort Laramie. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known they were being followed, that trouble was coming. He'd given her the gold, the deed to land he'd never lived to see, and a letter of introduction to his old war friend in Silver Creek. One last chance, Lila girl, he'd said, pressing the papers into her hands. One last chance to build something good. Now he was dead, and that chance was slipping away with every second she remained trapped behind this wagon. Girl's got to be here somewhere, Scarface said, his boots crunching on broken glass as he circled the wagon. Saw her plain as day when we rode up. Pretty little thing in a blue dress. Lila looked down at her dusty blue cotton, now stained with her father's blood and the red dirt of Wyoming. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Maybe she ran, the young one offered. Maybe she's halfway to Whispering Pines by now. On foot? In this heat? She'd be dead before sunset. The gravel-voiced man laughed, a sound like bones rattling in a box. Nah, she's close, probably watching us right now, scared as a cornered cat. He wasn't wrong. Lila could feel the fear like ice water in her veins, cold and paralyzing. Her finger rested on the trigger of her father's pistol, a Colt 31 that she'd fired exactly 3 times in her life, all at tin cans lined up on a fence post back in Missouri. She had 5 shots. There were 3 men. The mathematics of survival had never seemed so impossibly complex. We find her, we find the gold, Scarface announced, his voice taking on a commander's tone. "Jake, you check the north side. Donnie, you take the—" The words died in his throat as a new sound cut through the afternoon air. Hoofbeats, steady and purposeful, coming fast from the east. Lila's breath caught. The three men froze, hands dropping to their guns with the instinctive speed of practiced killers. She risked a glance through a gap in the wagon boards and saw him, a single rider cresting the low hill about 200 yards out, silhouetted against the burning sky. "Hell," Jake muttered. "That's—" "I know who it is," Scarface interrupted, and for the first time Lila heard something other than confidence in his voice, something that might have been fear. "Mount up, now." But the girl— "Now, Jake, unless you want to explain to Cole Mercer why you're picking over a dead man's belongings." The name meant nothing to Lila, but the effect it had on the three outlaws was immediate and profound. They scattered like startled crows, scrambling for their horses with a speed that suggested this Cole Mercer was someone even killers feared. Within seconds, they were mounted and riding hard to the west, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the ruins of everything Lila had left in the world. She stayed frozen behind the wagon, pistol raised, as the hoofbeats of the fleeing men faded into the distance and the approaching rider drew closer, closer, until she could hear the creak of leather, the jingle of spurs, the steady breathing of a horse that had been pushed hard but not cruelly. The hoofbeats stopped. "Ma'am," a voice said, low and careful, the kind of voice a man uses when approaching a wounded animal. "I don't mean you any harm, but if you're pointing a gun at me, I'd appreciate knowing it before I step down." Lila's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the pistol. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out, just a dry rasp that might have been words or might have been the last gasp of her courage leaving her body. "I'm going to dismount now," the voice continued, still calm, still gentle. "I'm going to keep my hands where you can see them, and then I'm going to step around this wagon real slow so you can get a look at me. That sound all right to you?" It didn't sound all right. Nothing about this day sounded all right. But Lila found herself nodding, then realized he couldn't see her and managed to force out a single word. "Yes." The man appeared around the edge of the wagon like a ghost taking form in the fading light. Tall, maybe 6 feet or better, with broad shoulders beneath a dusty brown duster and a black hat pulled low enough to shadow his eyes. His hands were raised to shoulder height, palms out, showing her he held no weapon. But Lila could see the gun belt at his hip, the worn leather holster that spoke of long use, the easy way he stood that suggested he knew exactly how to use what he carried. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. This strange cowboy with his raised hands and careful stance, and Lila, still pressed against the wagon with her father's pistol pointed at his chest, her face streaked with tears and dust, her dress dark with blood that wasn't hers. Then his eyes, shadowed beneath the hat brim, shifted past her to the body lying in the dirt, and something in his expression changed, softened, filled with a sorrow that looked too deep and too old to be for a stranger. "Your father?" he asked quietly. Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. The cowboy, Cole Mercer, the outlaws had called him, lowered his hand slowly and removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture of respect that was somehow more comforting than any words could have been. His hair was dark, touched with copper by the setting sun, and his eyes, when she could finally see them, were a startling shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over deep water. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words carried a weight of sincerity that made Lila's throat tighten. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. I saw the smoke from your camp about an hour back and rode hard, but you can put your hands down," Lila heard herself say, her voice sounding strange and distant. "And I should probably stop pointing this at you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Would appreciate that, ma'am, though I understand if you'd rather keep it handy. You don't know me from Adam, and I'm a stranger riding up on you at the worst moment of your life. Smart to be cautious." But Lila found she wasn't afraid of him, not the way she'd been afraid of the three outlaws, not with that sick instinctive terror that came from recognizing a predator. This man had something different in his eyes, something tired and sad and fundamentally decent, despite whatever reputation had sent those killers fleeing. She lowered the pistol slowly, though she didn't put it away. Cole Mercer nodded, accepting this, and settled his hat back on his head. Those men who just rode out, did they hurt you? No, my father, he hid me. Before they could, the words stuck in her throat like broken glass. All right. Cole's voice remained steady, gentle. That's all right. You don't have to explain. I can see what happened here. He looked around at the overturned wagon, the scattered belongings, the two dead horses shot where they'd stood in their traces. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice stayed calm when he spoke again. My name's Cole Mercer. I work at the Pierce Ranch about 15 miles south of Whispering Pines. I'm here to help you bury your dead and get you somewhere safe. If you'll let me. Lila stared at him, this stranger offering help with such simple certainty, as if there was nothing unusual about riding into a scene of murder and robbery and calmly offering to dig a grave. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain some shred of independence, to prove she could handle this alone. But the larger part, the part that was 22 years old and terrified and standing next to her father's body with the sun going down, knew the truth. She couldn't do this alone. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Cole Mercer looked at her for a long moment, those storm cloud eyes holding hers with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. When he spoke, his words were simple and true. You don't have to know someone to know they need help, ma'am. And you don't have to know someone to do what's right. Something in Lila's chest cracked open at those words. Some final barrier between the girl she'd been this morning and the woman she'd have to become to survive what came next. She felt tears spill hot down her cheeks, felt her legs start to shake, felt the pistol slip from her fingers to land in the dust at her feet. His name was John Granger, she said, her voice breaking. He was a good man. He deserved better than this. I'm sure he did. Cole stepped forward carefully, slowly, giving her time to object or retreat. When she didn't, he bent and picked up the fallen pistol, checked it with practiced hands, and offered it back to her grip first. And we're going to see he gets buried with the respect a good man deserves. But first, I need to ask you something important. Lila took the pistol, her fingers numb. What? Those men who were here, did they take anything from you? Anything at all? She shook her head. They didn't find what they were looking for. Cole's eyes sharpened slightly, but he didn't press. Good. That's good. Now, do you have any other family? Anyone expecting you somewhere? We were headed to Silver Creek, Lila said, the words coming automatically now, as if someone else was speaking through her mouth. My father had a friend there, Donovan Pierce, from the war. Something flickered across Cole's face. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. Donovan Pierce of the Pierce Ranch? Yes, do you know him? I work for him, Cole said quietly. He's a good man. One of the best I've ever known. If your father was his friend, then you've got safe harbor waiting for you, Miss Granger. Lila Granger. Miss Granger. Cole inclined his head slightly, a gesture that was somehow both respectful and comforting. I'm going to help you through this, but we need to move fairly quick. Sun's going down, and this isn't country to be out in after dark. Can you tell me where you'd like your father buried? Lila looked around at the endless prairie, the rolling hills that stretched to every horizon, the vast emptiness that had swallowed her father's last breath. She'd never felt so small, so lost, so utterly alone in all her life. Then her eyes found it. A solitary elm tree about 50 yards to the north, standing alone on a low rise, its branches spreading wide against the darkening sky. Her father had loved trees, had talked endlessly about the forests of Missouri, about shade and shelter and the way leaves sounded in the wind. He'd been headed west to claim land, to build a house, to plant an orchard. He'd wanted to grow things in this harsh country. There, she said, pointing to the elm, under that tree, so he'll have shade. Cole followed her gaze and nodded. It's a good spot, peaceful. Can you gather what belongings you want to keep while I prepare the site? For the next hour, as the sun painted the sky in shades of fire and blood, Lila moved through the wreckage of her former life like a sleepwalker. She salvaged her mother's Bible, the only thing she had left of the woman who'd died bringing her into the world. She found her father's favorite pipe, a tin photograph of her parents on their wedding day, a few changes of clothes that weren't too damaged. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the carefully packed crates that had held their hopes for a new beginning, she left scattered in the dust. Some things couldn't be carried forward. When she approached the elm tree, she found Cole had already dug deep into the hard prairie soil, his duster draped over a low branch, his shirt dark with sweat despite the cooling air. He worked with steady, methodical efficiency, his movements economical and practiced. This wasn't the first grave he'd dug, Lila realized, probably not even the 10th. He didn't stop working when she arrived, but he spoke quietly without looking up. Found a blanket in your wagon that was still clean. Thought we could wrap him properly, if that's all right with you. Lila felt fresh tears prick her eyes. The kindness of this stranger, this man who owed her nothing, was almost harder to bear than the cruelty of the ones who'd killed her father. "Thank you," she whispered. They buried John Granger as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Cole had fashioned a rough stretcher from wagon boards and blanket, had helped Lila wash her father's face and hands, had wrapped him with gentle respect before lowering him into the earth. Lila read from her mother's Bible, the 23rd Psalm, though her voice shook so badly she could barely form the words. Cole stood with his hat over his heart, head bowed, and when she faltered, he picked up the reading in a low, steady voice that carried across the prairie like a prayer. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." When the last shovelful of earth was placed and a simple cross fashioned from wagon wood marked the spot, Lila stood in the gathering darkness and felt the full weight of her loss settle over her like a physical thing. She was alone now. Truly, completely alone. An orphan at 22, with nothing but the clothes on her back, her father's gold hidden in her dress, and a letter of introduction to a man she'd never met. "Miss Granger," Cole said quietly, breaking into her thoughts, "I don't mean to rush you, but we need to make a decision. It's full dark soon, and those men who were here earlier, they might decide to come back once they figure I've moved on. We can make camp here if you want, but I'd recommend riding for Whispering Pines. It's only about 8 miles north, and they've got a proper hotel where you can rest safe." Lila looked at the fresh grave, at the cross standing stark against the starlight, and felt something harden in her chest. Her father had died trying to get her to safety, to give her a chance at the life he'd dreamed for her. She wouldn't dishonor that by getting herself killed in the wilderness out of sentiment. "Whispering Pines," she said firmly. "Let's go." Cole nodded and moved to gather her salvaged belongings, but Lila stopped him with a hand on his arm. He went still at her touch, looking down at her with those storm cloud eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, needing to understand. "Those men, they were afraid of you. They ran when they heard your name. You could have just kept riding. You could have ignored the smoke from our camp. Why did you stop?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, as if he were looking at something far beyond the darkening prairie. "Because a long time ago," he finally said, his voice rough with old pain, "I needed help and nobody came. I learned what it costs when good people ride on by and leave someone to face their nightmares alone. I swore I'd never be that person, never ride past someone in need if I had the power to help." He looked down at her hand still resting on his arm, then back to her face. "Your father sounds like he was a brave man, Miss Granger. Sounds like he fought to protect you with his last breath. The least I can do is make sure that sacrifice wasn't for nothing. The least I can do is get you somewhere safe." Lila felt something shift in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it. This stranger with the dangerous reputation and the gentle hands who'd stopped to help when he could have ridden on, who dug a grave in hard ground as the sun went down, who spoke of honor and sacrifice as if they still meant something in this harsh country. "Thank you, Mr. Mercer," she said quietly. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for this kindness." A sad smile touched his lips. "Don't need repaying, ma'am. Just doing what any decent person would do." He paused, then added softly, "Though I'd appreciate it if you'd call me Cole. Mr. Mercer makes me feel like my father, and that's not a comparison I'm eager to claim." "Cole, then," Lila agreed. "And I'm Lila. Just Lila." "All right, just Lila." The small attempt at humor didn't quite reach his eyes, but Lila appreciated the effort. Let's get you to town before the temperature drops much more. The ride to Whispering Pines passed in a blur of starlight and steady hoofbeats. Cole had provided Lila with one of the dead horse's saddles, rigged to his own mount so she could ride behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, her few belongings secured in his saddlebags. She should have been uncomfortable, pressed close to a strange man in the darkness, but exhaustion and grief had burned through her capacity for propriety. She simply held on and let him guide them through the night. Cole spoke occasionally, pointing out landmarks she couldn't see in the darkness, warning her when the horse would step over rough ground, keeping up a quiet stream of gentle conversation that asked nothing of her but kept the silence from becoming oppressive. He told her about Whispering Pines, a small ranching town of maybe 200 souls, with a general store, a church, a hotel, and a saloon that served surprisingly good steak on Saturdays. He described the country they were riding through, the way it would look in daylight, the cattle ranches that dotted the hills, the creek that ran year-round and gave the town its name. He didn't ask about her father, or what had happened, or where she was planning to go. He didn't press for details or expect her to explain her life to him. He just rode steady and true through the darkness, and somehow that quiet competence was more comforting than any words could have been. They reached Whispering Pines just before 9 o'clock, the scattered lights of the town appearing like earthbound stars in the distance. As they rode down the main street, really the only street, Lila saw what Cole had described, a row of simple wooden buildings, a church with a white steeple, a hotel with a painted sign proclaiming clean rooms, fair prices, and sure enough, a saloon from which came the sound of a piano and rough male laughter. Cole guided the horse to the hotel and dismounted smoothly before reaching up to help Lila down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground. She'd been riding for hours, and before that, crouched behind the wagon in terror. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, all strange angles and unreliable joints. Cole steadied her with a hand at her elbow, his grip firm but gentle. "Easy now. Take a minute to get your bearings." "I'm fine," Lila said automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. "Of course you are," Cole agreed mildly, not letting go until she was steady on her feet. "But you've had a hell of a day, and there's no shame in admitting it. Come on, let's get you inside." The hotel lobby was small but clean, with worn but serviceable furniture and a desk where a middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up from her ledger as they entered. Her expression shifted from welcome to concern as she took in Lila's disheveled appearance, the blood on her dress, the haunted look in her eyes. "Good Lord, Cole," the woman said, coming around the desk. "What happened?" "Trouble on the trail, Mrs. Hendricks," Cole said quietly. "Miss Granger here lost her father to bandits this afternoon. She needs a room, a hot bath, a meal, and somewhere safe to rest. Can you help her?" Mrs. Hendricks' face softened with immediate sympathy. Of course, you poor dear." She turned to Lila and took her hands in a gentle grip. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Miss Granger. Come with me. I'll get you sorted out right away. Cole, you'll stay for coffee at least?" "Can't tonight, ma'am. Need to ride out to the ranch and let Mr. Pierce know what's happened." He looked at Lila, and something in his expression made her chest tighten. Miss Granger's father was headed to see Donovan. They were old friends from the war. "I expect he'll want to know about this." "Oh, that's right. Donovan did mention expecting a visitor." Mrs. Hendricks squeezed Lila's hands. "Well then, you're practically family already, dear. Donovan's a good man and he'll see you right. You don't have to worry about anything now." But Lila found herself worrying about one thing in particular as Mrs. Hendricks began to usher her toward the stairs. She turned back to Cole, who was already heading for the door. "Wait," she called out, and he stopped, looking back at her with those storm cloud eyes. Will I see you again?" The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended, revealing just how much she'd come to depend on this stranger's steady presence in the few short hours since he'd ridden into her nightmare. Cole's expression softened. "I expect so, Miss Granger. The Pierce Ranch isn't far, and I'll need to bring Mr. Pierce to town when he comes to meet you. Besides," he paused, then added quietly, "I like to see things through. Make sure the people I help actually make it to safe harbor. So yes, you'll see me again." "Good," Lila said, and meant it more than she could articulate. "Thank you, Cole, for everything." Just doing what's right, ma'am. He tipped his hat to her, then to Mrs. Hendricks, and disappeared into the night, leaving Lila standing in the warm lobby with a stranger's kindness wrapped around her like a blanket, and her father's grave fresh in the earth 8 miles south. Mrs. Hendricks guided her upstairs to a small room with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. While Lila stood numbly in the center of the space, the older woman busied herself building a fire, heating water, laying out clean towels with brisk efficiency. "I'll bring up some stew and bread in a bit," she said, her voice gentle. "And I've got a nightdress you can borrow. We're about the same size, I think. You just wash up and try to rest, dear. Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure out what comes next." Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. When Mrs. Hendricks finally left, closing the door softly behind her, Lila sank onto the edge of the bed and let herself fall apart. She cried for her father, for the life they'd planned that would never be, for the fear that had gripped her behind that wagon, for the loneliness of an unmarked grave on an empty prairie. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes burned, until there were no more tears left, only a hollow ache where her heart used to be. Then she washed her face in the basin of warm water Mrs. Hendricks had left, changed out of her blood-stained dress into the borrowed nightgown, and ate the stew that appeared outside her door like magic. She moved through these motions mechanically, her body obeying while her mind drifted somewhere far away, not quite ready to fully inhabit this new reality. Finally, as the town settled into quiet around her and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, Lila lay down in a stranger's bed in a strange town and closed her eyes. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of Cole Mercer riding through the darkness toward the Pierce Ranch, carrying news of death to a man who'd been expecting a reunion with an old friend. She wondered what Donovan Pierce would think when he heard. She wondered if he'd want to take in the orphaned daughter of his war companion, or if that letter of introduction would prove worthless now that her father couldn't vouch for her character. She wondered if she'd ever feel safe again. But underneath all that wondering, buried deep where she wasn't quite ready to examine it, was something else. The memory of storm cloud eyes and gentle hands, of a stranger who'd stopped when he could have ridden on, who dug a grave as the sun set and asked nothing in return. "You don't have to know someone to know they need help," he'd said. In the darkness of her room, Lila Granger held on to those words like a lifeline and let herself believe, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Outside, the wind whispered through the streets of whispering pines, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain, and somewhere out on the prairie, under a solitary elm tree, a fresh grave settled into the earth, while the stars kept their silent watch above. The story had only just begun. Morning came too early and too bright, sunlight slicing through the thin curtains of Lila's room like an accusation. For one merciful moment, she didn't remember. Then it all crashed back. Her father's death, the grave under the elm tree, the long ride through darkness with a stranger's arms the only thing keeping her from falling into the void. She lay still, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, and wondered how the world could keep turning when hers had stopped completely. A soft knock at the door pulled her from the gray fog of grief. "Miss Granger, are you awake, dear?" Mrs. Hendricks' voice carried that particular gentleness people reserved for the newly bereaved, as if speaking too loudly might shatter what fragile pieces remained. Lila sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. "Yes, ma'am. I'm awake. I've brought you some breakfast and fresh water for washing. May I come in?" "Of course." Mrs. Hendricks entered with the tray balanced on one hip, her expression carefully neutral as she took in Lila's hollow eyes and pale face. She set the tray on the small table by the window, scrambled eggs, toast, coffee that smelled like liquid salvation, and turned to face her guest with the kind of directness Lila was learning to appreciate in Western women. "I won't pretend to know what you're feeling, Miss Granger, but I've buried people I loved, and I know that eating seems impossible when your heart's broken. But your body doesn't care about your grief. It still needs fuel. So I'm going to leave this here, and I'm going to check back in an hour, and I expect to see at least half of it gone. Understood?" Despite everything, Lila felt a ghost of a smile touch her lips. "Yes, ma'am." "Good girl." Mrs. Hendricks moved toward the door, then paused. "Cole Mercer came by early this morning, before dawn actually, left money for your room and board, paid up for 2 weeks. Also left this." She produced an envelope from her apron pocket and handed it to Lila. The paper was simple, the handwriting neat and precise, her name written across the front in dark ink, Miss L. Granger. He said to tell you that Mr. Pierce will be in town this afternoon to speak with you, and that you shouldn't worry about anything. Everything's been taken care of. Mrs. Hendricks' expression softened. Cole's a good man, Miss Granger. Whatever you might hear about him in town, whatever stories people tell, you remember that. He's got a past, same as we all do, but his character's solid. I trust him with my life, and I don't say that lightly. The words carried a weight of warning and reassurance both, leaving Lila more confused than comforted. What kind of stories? Mrs. Hendricks hesitated, clearly weighing her words. The kind that aren't mine to tell. If Cole wants you to know his history, he'll share it. And if other people want to gossip, well, that's their prerogative. But I'm telling you what I know from 5 years of watching that man live in this town. He's decent, he's honorable, and he keeps his word. That's all that matters to me. She left before Lila could ask anything else, closing the door with a soft click that somehow felt final. Alone again, Lila turned the envelope over in her hands, noting the wax seal pressed into the back, a simple circle with no distinguishing marks. She broke it carefully and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Miss Granger, I've arranged for your lodging and meals at the hotel for the next 2 weeks. Mrs. Hendricks is a good woman and will see to whatever you need. I've also spoken with Mr. Pierce, and he'll be coming to town this afternoon around 3 o'clock to meet with you. He was deeply grieved to hear about your father's passing and asks that you not worry about your circumstances. He considers you family by virtue of your father's friendship, and he'll honor whatever plans your father made for your future. I've taken the liberty of arranging for a small sum to be made available to you at the general store should you need anything before Mr. Pierce arrives. Please don't hesitate to make use of it. Consider it a loan if it makes you more comfortable, though I give it freely. I'm sorry I can't be there when Mr. Pierce arrives to meet you, but ranch business calls me away for a few days. I want you to know that your father was buried with honor and respect, and his grave will be tended and marked properly. You have my word on that. If you need anything at all, Mrs. Hendricks knows how to reach me. Respectfully, Cole Mercer. Lila read the letter 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of thoughtfulness. He'd anticipated her needs before she'd even recognized them herself. Shelter, food, money, introductions. He'd eased her path forward with quiet efficiency, asking nothing in return, not even her gratitude. And he'd promised to care for her father's grave. Something in her chest cracked open at that detail, and she found herself crying again, not the racking sobs of last night, but quiet tears that slipped down her cheeks as she held the letter against her heart. This stranger had shown her more kindness in 12 hours than some people showed in a lifetime, and she didn't even know why. You don't have to know someone to know they need help. Maybe that was reason enough. She forced herself to eat half the breakfast as promised, though it tasted like ash in her mouth. Then she washed and dressed in the least damaged of her salvaged dresses, a simple gray cotton that seemed appropriate for morning, and spent the morning sitting by the window, watching whispering pines wake up and go about its business with the surreal normalcy of a world that hadn't ended. At precisely 3 o'clock, a handsome carriage pulled up in front of the hotel, driven by a gray-haired man with military bearing and eyes that had seen hard things. He climbed down with the careful movements of someone whose body remembered old wounds, straightened his vest with automatic precision, and disappeared into the hotel. 5 minutes later, Mrs. Hendricks knocked on Lila's door. "Mr. Pierce is here, dear. Are you ready?" Lila smoothed her skirt with trembling hands. "As ready as I'll ever be, sirs." She followed Mrs. Hendricks downstairs to the small parlor off the main lobby, where the gray-haired man stood examining a painting on the wall with the kind of attention that suggested he was giving her time to compose herself. He turned as she entered, and Lila saw her father's face ghost across his expression, recognition, memory, and then a sorrow so deep it made her own grief feel less lonely. "Miss Granger," he said, his voice roughened by emotion. "I'm Donovan Pierce. Your father and I served together in the war. He saved my life at Antietam, and I've considered him one of the finest men I've ever known." He paused, visibly struggling for control. "I'm so very sorry for your loss. John Granger deserved a better end than what found him on that trail." Lila's throat tightened. "He spoke of you often, Mr. Pierce.
He said you were the bravest man he'd ever fought beside and the truest friend he'd ever known. Donovan's eyes grew bright.
Did he? Well, he was too generous with his praise, as always, but I'm honored he remembered me kindly. He gestured to the chairs arranged by the fireplace. Please sit. We have much to discuss. They settled into the worn furniture, and Mrs. Hendricks appeared with coffee and cake that neither of them touched. For a long moment, Donovan simply looked at Lila, his expression unreadable. You have your mother's eyes, he finally said. John showed me a photograph once, years ago. Said you were the spitting image of her, and he was right. He shook his head slowly. He was so proud of you, Miss Granger. Every letter he wrote mentioned something you'd accomplished, some way you'd made him proud. He lived for you after your mother passed. You were his whole world. The words hit Lila like physical blows, each one true and terrible and cherished. He was mine too. I don't know what to do now that he's gone. You survive, Donovan said simply. You wake up each morning and you survive, and eventually the surviving gets easier. Not the missing. That never gets easier. But the surviving does. He leaned forward, his gaze steady and sure. Your father wrote to me 6 months ago, telling me about his plans to come west. He asked if I might have work for him on the ranch, or if I knew of good land he could claim nearby. I wrote back and told him I had both. Work if he wanted it, land if he preferred independence. He wrote again just before you left Fort Laramie, telling me you'd be arriving within the month. Donovan paused, choosing his words carefully. In that last letter, he asked me for a promise. He said that if anything happened to him on the journey, I was to look after you as if you were my own daughter. He said you were smart and capable and stronger than you knew, but that the world was hard on women alone, and he wanted to know you'd have protection and family if he couldn't provide it himself. Lila's hands clenched in her lap. He knew. He knew something might happen. I think he sensed danger, yes. John always had good instincts. Donovan's expression hardened. Cole told me about the men who attacked you, the one with the scar and his companions. I know them by reputation. They're cowards and thieves who prey on travelers. The law's been after them for months, but they're slippery bastards. He caught himself. Pardon my language. I've heard worse, Lila said quietly, and thought worse about them myself. A ghost of approval crossed Donovan's face. I imagine you have. Well, I've put word out with the sheriff that I want those men found and brought to justice for John's murder. It may take time, but they'll answer for what they've done. You have my word on that. Thank you. Lila met his eyes directly. But what I need to know, Mr. Pierce, is whether your promise to my father still stands. Whether you're willing to take in a stranger just because a dead man asked you to. Donovan didn't hesitate. You're not a stranger, Miss Granger. You're John Granger's daughter, which makes you family. And yes, my promise stands. I have a large house on a working ranch with more rooms than I need and more work than I can handle alone. You're welcome to stay as long as you like, as a guest, as family, or as an employee if you'd prefer to earn your keep. The choice is entirely yours. The relief that flooded through Lila was almost painful in its intensity. I'd prefer to earn my keep, if that's possible. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'd rather be useful than ornamental. Spoken like John's daughter. Donovan smiled for the first time, and it transformed his stern features into something warm and welcoming. I can always use help with the books and correspondence. My foreman handles the ranch operations, but the business side has gotten complicated as we've expanded. If you've got a head for numbers and can write a decent letter, you'd be doing me a genuine service. I can do both, Lila assured him. My father made sure I was educated. I can read, write, cipher, and keep accounts. I even know a bit of Spanish and French. Then you're overqualified, and I'm fortunate. Donovan stood, offering her his hand. Welcome to the Pierce Ranch, Miss Granger. I think you and I are going to get along just fine. Lila took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip, the calluses that spoke of work done and hardship endured. Thank you, Mr. Pierce. I promise I won't be a burden. Call me Donovan, please. And the only burden would be you thinking you have to earn your place with me. You already have it, by right of your father's friendship and your own merit. He released her hand and moved toward the door. Now, I'm going to let you rest for tonight, but tomorrow I'll send a wagon to collect you and your belongings. The ranch is about 15 miles south and west. Beautiful country once you get used to the emptiness. We'll get you settled, and you can start whenever you feel ready." "Tomorrow is fine," Lila said quickly. "I'd rather not spend more time here than necessary. Not because of Mrs. Hendricks, she's been wonderful, but sitting idle with my thoughts isn't helping anything." Donovan nodded understanding. "Grief needs occupation. I learned that myself after I lost my wife 10 years ago. The work won't make you forget, but it'll give you somewhere to put the pain until you're ready to face it properly." He paused at the doorway. "One more thing. Cole Mercer is my foreman and lives on the ranch. I don't know what he told you about himself, but I want you to know that he's a good man who's had bad luck, and I trust him absolutely. If you hear stories about him in town, please give him the chance to explain before you make judgments." It was the second time someone had warned her about Cole's mysterious past, and Lila's curiosity sharpened. "What kind of stories exactly?" "The kind that aren't always true, and aren't always fair," Donovan said carefully. "The kind that follow a man who's been falsely accused and can't fully clear his name because the people with power don't want the truth to come out." His expression grew fierce. "Cole Mercer is one of the finest men I've ever known, Miss Granger. He saved my life, saved my ranch, and saved more people than I can count from trouble they didn't deserve. Whatever you hear about his past, remember that I know him, I trust him, and I'd stake my reputation on his character." The vehemence in his voice left no room for doubt about his convictions, even if it didn't answer Lila's questions. "I'll remember that. And for what it's worth, he was nothing but kind to me when I needed help most. I already know he's a good man, whatever his history might be." Donovan's expression softened. "I'm glad. He'll be pleased to know you made it safely to the ranch when he returns from his business in Cheyenne." After Donovan left, Lila returned to her room and discovered the full extent of Cole's generosity. On the dresser sat a small pile of items she hadn't noticed before: a new dress in deep blue cotton, a warm shawl, sturdy boots in what looked like her exact size, and a wide-brimmed hat suitable for the harsh western sun. Tucked beneath them was another note in that same precise handwriting. "Thought you might need these. The general store owner is good at guessing sizes." See, Lila held the dress against herself and found it fit perfectly. The boots, too. Even the hat sat comfortably on her head when she tried it on, shading her face from the mirror's reflection. How had he known? When had he arranged this? He must have gone to the store before dawn, must have described her to the owner, must have spent his own money to ensure she had what she needed. She didn't even know how to begin repaying such kindness. That evening, as Lila sat by the window watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of orange and gold, Mrs. Hendricks brought up dinner and stayed to chat. The older woman seemed to understand that Lila needed company, but not conversation, so she mostly talked about inconsequential things: the weather, the town's upcoming summer dance, the rancher's wife who'd just had twins. But eventually, inevitably, the conversation turned to Cole Mercer. "I suppose you're wondering about him," Mrs. Hendricks said, setting down her coffee cup with a delicate clink, "about why everyone speaks of him with such strange mix of respect and wariness." Lila hesitated, not wanting to seem like she was gossiping, but curiosity won out. "Mr. Pierce and you both warned me about stories, but nobody's told me what the stories actually are." Mrs. Hendricks sighed. "That's because they're complicated, dear, and most people don't know the full truth. What I'm about to tell you is what Cole told Donovan, who told me in confidence, so I'll ask you to keep it to yourself." "Of course." 5 years ago, Cole Mercer was a different man, young, idealistic, working as a deputy in a town called Silver Falls, about 200 miles east of here. He came from a good family, had prospects, was even engaged to be married. Mrs. Hendricks paused, her expression troubled. Then the judge's son and his friends robbed the bank, killed a clerk in the process, and framed Cole for the crime. Lila's breath caught. "What? Why?" "Because Cole had arrested the judge's son the month before for beating a saloon girl half to death, and the boy wanted revenge. He and his friends staged the robbery, wore masks, killed poor Mr. Henderson, who was just doing his job, and made sure witnesses saw someone matching Cole's description fleeing the scene.
They planted evidence in Cole's room, testimony from paid liars, even found a prostitute willing to swear Cole had confessed to her in bed. Mrs. Hendrick's hands tightened around her cup. The trial was a farce. The judge, the boy's father, presided. The jury was stacked with the judge's friends. Cole's fiancée turned on him, claimed she'd always suspected he was violent and dishonest. They convicted him in less than an hour and sentenced him to hang. Horror washed through Lila. But he's here. He obviously didn't hang. No. The night before his execution, someone helped him escape. Nobody knows who, though there's speculation it was the real bank robber's conscience finally catching up to them, or maybe another deputy who knew the truth. Cole ran. He's been running ever since, working under his own name but staying one step ahead of the law that wants him dead for a crime he didn't commit. Lila stared at Mrs. Hendricks, trying to reconcile this story with the gentle man who'd buried her father and arranged for her care. But if he's innocent, why doesn't he fight the charges? Why doesn't he prove the truth? Because the judge is powerful, the witnesses are paid to lie, and the real criminals have covered their tracks too well. Cole tried for the first year, sent letters, hired lawyers, gathered evidence. But every door closed in his face. The judge made sure of it. Eventually, Cole realized the only way he'd get justice was if the real robbers confessed or the judge's son made a mistake, and neither seemed likely. Mrs. Hendricks met Lila's eyes squarely. So he chose to live his life as best he could, helping people where he found them, doing good work, building a reputation for honor and decency in the places that mattered. The law may call him a criminal, but everyone who actually knows him knows the truth. That's why those men ran when they heard his name, Lila said slowly, understanding dawning. Not because he's dangerous, but because he's got a reputation as someone who fights for people who can't fight for themselves. Exactly. Cole Mercer may be wanted for crimes he didn't commit, but he's also known as a man who doesn't abide bullies, thieves, or cowards. Those outlaws who killed your father knew that if Cole found them picking over a dead man's belongings, there'd be hell to pay, warrant or no warrant. Lila sat back, her mind reeling. She thought about the way Cole had handled her father's body with such gentle respect, the way he'd spoken about doing what was right, the way he'd arranged for her care without asking anything in return. She thought about Donovan's fierce defense and Mrs. Hendrick's obvious affection. And she thought about her father, who'd always said that character was proven in adversity, that the measure of a man wasn't what he had, but what he did with what he'd been given. "I believe he's innocent," she said quietly. "I don't know him well, but I believe it." Mrs. Hendricks smiled. "So do I, dear. So do most people who've met him. But belief doesn't change the law, and the law says he's a killer and a thief. So he lives carefully, works honestly, and hopes that someday the truth will come out." She stood, collecting their dishes. "But that's enough heavy talk for one night. You should rest. Tomorrow's a new beginning for you." The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Lila woke feeling something she hadn't expected: anticipation. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but underneath it ran a current of possibility. She was going to start a new life at the Pierce Ranch, going to make herself useful, going to honor her father's dream of building something good in this harsh country. The wagon arrived at 10 o'clock, driven by a cheerful young cowboy who introduced himself as Tommy Birch and insisted on carrying all of Lila's meager belongings himself, despite her protests. "Mr. Pierce would have my hide if I let a lady carry her own bags," he said with a grin that suggested he'd never encountered a hardship that could dim his good humor. "Besides, you're practically family, Miss Granger. Mr. Pierce told everyone how you're his old friend's daughter and how we're all to treat you respectful and make sure you settle in proper." The ride to the ranch took them through country that took Lila's breath away despite her grief. Rolling hills covered in grass that rippled like water in the wind, distant mountains purple against the horizon, creeks cutting silver paths through the land. Tommy kept up a running commentary, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the ranch, with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved his work. "That's where Cole broke the Mustang nobody thought could be tamed," he said, gesturing to a wide meadow. "And over there's where we found the lost cattle during the blizzard last year. Cole tracked them through snow so deep it came up to the horses' bellies. Man's got a gift for reading land and animals both."
There was that name again, spoken with the kind of respect that couldn't be faked. Whatever the law said about Cole Mercer, the people who worked with him clearly held him in high regard. The Pierce Ranch came into view as they crested a final hill, and Lila felt her breath catch. The main house was larger than she'd expected, a sprawling two-story structure of wood and stone with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, bunkhouses, barns, corrals, storage sheds, all well-maintained and purposeful. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and horses moved in the nearest corral with the kind of sleek health that spoke of good care. It looked like exactly what it was, a successful ranch run by someone who understood the land and the business both. Donovan emerged from the house before the wagon had fully stopped, his face lighting with genuine welcome. "Miss Granger, welcome home." Home. The word settled into Lila's chest with unexpected weight. She'd lost one home when her father died, but maybe, just maybe, she was finding another. The next few hours passed in a blur of introductions and tours. Donovan showed her through the house, giving her a spacious bedroom on the second floor with windows overlooking the western hills and her own private washroom, luxuries she hadn't expected. He introduced her to Maria, the housekeeper who ran the domestic side of the ranch with cheerful efficiency, and to various ranch hands who tipped their hats and welcomed her with varying degrees of shyness and curiosity. By evening, Lila's head spun with names and faces and information, but underneath the overwhelm ran a current of something she hadn't felt since her father's death. Belonging. That night, after a dinner of beef stew and fresh bread eaten in the warm glow of Donovan's dining room, Lila stood on the upstairs balcony outside her room and watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The wind carried the scent of grass and cattle and possibility, and for the first time since that terrible afternoon behind the wagon, she felt something other than grief. She felt hope. Somewhere out on the prairie, under a solitary elm tree, her father's grave marked the end of one journey. But here, on this ranch, in this vast country with these good people, another journey was just beginning. And when Cole Mercer returned from Cheyenne, she would thank him properly, for the Cole Mercer returned to the Pierce Ranch on a Saturday afternoon in late June, riding in with the kind of quiet competence that marked everything he did. Lila saw him first from the office window where she'd been working on the quarterly accounts, her pen pausing mid-stroke as she watched him dismount in the yard below. 3 weeks had passed since that terrible day on the trail. 3 weeks since she'd last seen those storm cloud eyes, and she was surprised by how her heart lifted at the sight of him. She'd thought about him often during those weeks, usually late at night when grief made sleep impossible, and she found herself replaying every moment of that day. His steady voice in the darkness, his gentle hands helping her bury her father, the way he'd arranged everything for her comfort without ever making her feel like a charity case. She'd wanted to thank him properly, had rehearsed a dozen different speeches in her mind, but now that he was actually here, all her carefully prepared words evaporated like morning dew. By the time she made it downstairs, Cole was already deep in conversation with Donovan on the front porch, their heads bent over what looked like shipping manifests. She hesitated in the doorway, suddenly uncertain, but Donovan glanced up and waved her over with a smile. "Lila, perfect timing. Cole's just returned from Cheyenne with news about the cattle contracts." He turned to his foreman. "Cole, you remember Miss Granger?" "Of course." Cole removed his hat, and Lila saw something shift in his expression when he looked at her. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction at finding her safe and settled. "Miss Granger, it's good to see you looking well." "Thanks to you," Lila said, finding her voice at last. "Mr. Mercer, I need to thank you for everything you did for me. The room, the clothes, the arrangements with Mr. Pierce. It was far more than anyone could have expected, and I'm deeply grateful." A faint color rose in Cole's cheeks, as if her gratitude embarrassed him. "You needed help. I was able to provide it. That's all there is to it." "That's not all there is to it, and you know it," Lila insisted. "You went out of your way for a complete stranger, and I want you to know it meant everything to me. Still means everything." Cole met her eyes for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his face. "You're welcome, Miss Granger. I'm just glad you found safe harbor here." "She's been a godsend," Donovan interjected, clearly sensing the need to ease the tension.
Already reorganized my entire filing system, caught 3 errors in the feed supplier's invoices, and managed to negotiate better terms on our freight contracts. I don't know how I managed before she arrived. I just applied basic accounting principles, Lila protested, though she couldn't help feeling pleased at the praise. Anyone with proper training could have done the same. Except nobody else did, Donovan countered. You've saved the ranch a considerable sum already, and you've only been here 3 weeks. I'd call that more than basic accounting. Cole's expression shifted to something that might have been approval. Always did say you needed someone who understood business, not just cattle. Sounds like you finally found her. That I did, Donovan clapped Cole on the shoulder. Now, you must be exhausted from the road. Why don't you get settled and we'll discuss the Cheyenne contracts at dinner? Lila's been joining me for meals since she arrived. I'd be pleased if you'd join us as well. We can make it a proper business discussion. Something flickered across Cole's face. Hesitation, maybe, or uncertainty. I wouldn't want to intrude on your hospitality, sir. I can take my meal with the hands like usual. Nonsense. You're my foreman, and this concerns ranch business. Besides, I think Miss Granger would appreciate hearing about your trip to Cheyenne. You passed near Fort Laramie, didn't you? Cole's eyes found Lila's, a question in them. She realized with a start what Donovan was suggesting. Cole had gone to her father's grave, had checked on it, had probably done whatever needed doing to ensure it was properly tended. I did pass through that area, Cole said carefully. Made a stop to see that everything was as it should be. Lila's throat tightened. And was it? It was. The grave's well marked now, with a proper headstone. Had it carved in Cheyenne before I rode out. White marble with his name, dates, and a line from that psalm you read at the burial. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Figured it was fitting. The tears came before Lila could stop them, hot and sudden, and full of a grief that was still too raw to be fully processed. Cole had done this. Had spent his own money on a marble headstone for a man he'd never met. Had chosen words that honored both her father and the moment they'd laid him to rest. Had cared enough to make sure John Granger didn't lie in an unmarked grave on the empty prairie. Thank you, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. You didn't have to do that. I know, Cole said simply. But it seemed right. Donovan cleared his throat, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Well then, that settles it. Dinner at 6, Cole. I'll expect you at the house, and I won't take no for an answer. Dinner that evening was both easier and harder than Lila had anticipated. Easier because Donovan kept the conversation focused on business, the cattle contracts, shipping schedules, plans for expanding the breeding program. Harder because she found herself acutely aware of Cole's presence across the table, the way his hands moved when he gestured, the low rumble of his voice when he spoke, the occasional flash of humor that lit his eyes when Donovan told stories about the ranch's early days. She'd thought she had his measure, had believed she understood who Cole Mercer was based on their brief encounter and the stories people told. But watching him now in the warm lamplight of Donovan's dining room, she realized there were depths to this man she hadn't begun to plumb. He spoke about cattle and land with the knowledge of someone who'd spent years studying both, discussed financial projections with the ease of an educated man, and treated Donovan with a respect that was clearly mutual and hard-earned. This was no simple cowboy, no rough ranch hand making his way in the world. This was a man of intelligence and capability who'd been dealt a terrible injustice and had somehow managed to build a life worth living despite it. You're quiet tonight, Lila, Donovan observed as Maria cleared their plates. Everything all right? Just thinking, Lila said, pulling herself back to the present, about how much has changed in such a short time. Change is the only constant out here, Cole said quietly. The land looks eternal, but everything's always shifting. Seasons, fortunes, circumstances. You learn to adapt or you don't survive. Spoken like a true frontiersman, Donovan said with a chuckle. Though I seem to recall you arrived here 5 years ago as green as spring grass, nearly got yourself killed trying to rope a wild stallion your second week. Cole's lips quirked. In my defense, nobody told me that particular stallion was famous for killing the last 3 men who tried to break him. You're lucky you just got trampled and not kicked to death, Donovan countered. Spent 2 weeks laid up with broken ribs while Maria threatened to quit if I kept hiring fool Eastern boys who don't know a Mustang from a milk cow. I learned, Cole said mildly, and I still maintain that if Tommy hadn't distracted me at the critical moment, I would have had that rope secure. Tommy was 12 years old and screaming because you were about to die, Donovan shot back, but he was grinning. But yes, you learned. Became the best horseman I've ever employed, and the only foreman I've had who actually understands that ranching is as much business as it is cattle. Lila found herself smiling despite the heaviness in her chest. There was an easy camaraderie between these two men, a bond forged through shared work and mutual respect. It reminded her of how her father used to speak about his war companions, not just as fellow soldiers, but as brothers who'd seen each other through hell and come out intact on the other side. Tell me about the Eastern stallion who nearly killed himself trying to rope horses, she said impulsively, looking at Cole. I'd like to hear how you ended up here. Cole's expression shuddered slightly, and Lila immediately regretted the question. But Donovan leaned back in his chair with the satisfied look of a man about to tell a favorite story. It's a good tale, and one worth telling. Cole here arrived 5 years ago on a half-dead horse with nothing but the clothes on his back and a letter of introduction from a mutual friend. I almost didn't hire him. He looked too refined for ranch work, too educated, too obviously running from something. But there was something in his eyes that reminded me of myself after the war, and I figured a man deserved a chance to prove himself. Cole shifted uncomfortably, but didn't interrupt. First month, he worked harder than any 3 men combined, trying to prove he belonged. Nearly worked himself to death, actually, collapsed in the barn one night from exhaustion and dehydration. Maria found him and read me the riot act about working my employees into early graves. Donovan's expression softened. After that, I sat him down and told him the truth. He didn't have to prove anything to me. I'd already decided he had the job. What he needed to prove was that he could accept help when he needed it, could trust people, could let himself be part of something bigger than just survival. Lila's eyes found Cole's, saw the careful blankness he'd adopted to hide whatever he was feeling. And did you? Accept help, I mean? Eventually, Cole said quietly. Took me longer than it should have. I'd spent so long running, so long trusting no one, that I'd forgotten how to be part of a community. Donovan taught me that not everyone was out to betray me, that some people meant what they said and honored their commitments. Some people, Donovan said firmly, recognized a good man having a run of bad luck and decided to help him find his footing again. Best decision I ever made. Hiring you. This ranch wouldn't be half what it is without your work. The sincerity in Donovan's voice was unmistakable, and Lila saw Cole blink rapidly, as if fighting unexpected emotion. She understood suddenly that this was more than employer and employee, more even than friendship. Donovan had given Cole something precious and rare. A place to belong, a purpose, a reason to stop running and start building. Just as he was now giving her the same gifts. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, and by the time Lila excused herself to retire for the evening, she felt she understood both men better. Understood why Donovan defended Cole so fiercely, why the ranch hands respected him so completely, why her father had trusted his old war friend's judgment enough to send his daughter into Donovan's care. These were good men in a hard land, doing their best to build something lasting and true. As summer deepened and July burned hot across the Wyoming hills, Lila settled into the rhythms of ranch life with surprising ease. Her mornings were spent managing the business side of operations, correspondence with buyers, inventory tracking, payroll calculations, contract negotiations. Afternoons, she often spent learning the physical work of the ranch, despite Donovan's protests that she was hired for her mind, not her labor. I need to understand how everything works, she insisted, pulling on the riding gloves Tommy had given her. How can I manage the business if I don't understand the actual work being done? So Tommy taught her to ride properly, graduating her from the gentle mare she'd started with to increasingly spirited horses until she could handle most of what the ranch had to offer. The ranch hands showed her how to mend fence, how to read cattle for signs of illness, how to manage the complex logistics of moving livestock across vast distances. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, she became not just Donovan's bookkeeper but a genuine member of the ranch community. Cole watched her progress with what seemed like quiet approval, though he kept a careful distance that Lila couldn't quite interpret. He was never unkind, always respectful, frequently helpful when she had questions about ranch operations. But there was a wall between them, invisible but unmistakable, as if he decided that maintaining professional boundaries was safer than allowing anything more personal to develop. It shouldn't have bothered her. She was here to work, to build a new life, to honor her father's memory by making something of herself in this hard country. She shouldn't care whether the ranch foreman maintained polite distance, but she did care. More than she wanted to admit. "You're staring at him again," Maria observed one afternoon in late July, catching Lila watching through the kitchen window as Cole worked with a young horse in the corral. Lila jerked her attention back to the vegetables she was supposed to be chopping. "I wasn't staring, I was just watching him work. He's very good with horses." "Mm-hmm." Maria's tone suggested she wasn't fooled for a second. "And I suppose you've been asking Tommy all those questions about Cole's daily schedule because you're just interested in ranch management." "I have been interested in ranch management," Lila protested, feeling her cheeks heat. "It's important to understand how all the pieces fit together. The only piece you seem interested in understanding is the one with storm cloud eyes and a gentle way with broken things." Maria set down her own knife and fixed Lila with a knowing look. "I've seen the way you watch him, Nina, and I've seen the way he tries very hard not to watch you back." Lila's hands stilled. "What do you mean?" "I mean that man looks at you when he thinks no one's watching, looks at you like a man dying of thirst looks at water. Then he catches himself and turns away, builds that wall higher, reminds himself of all the reasons he should keep his distance." Maria's expression softened. "He's protecting you in his way, protecting you from the complications his past would bring into your life." "That's not his decision to make," Lila said quietly. "No, but it's the decision he's made anyway. Cole Mercer is many things, but selfish isn't one of them. He won't let himself care for you the way he wants to because he believes you deserve better than a man with a price on his head." The words settled into Lila's chest like stones. She'd known about the warrant, about the false accusations, about the injustice that had driven Cole into exile, but she hadn't fully considered how that history might be shaping his present choices, keeping him locked in a solitude he'd never chosen. "What if I don't want better?" she heard herself ask. "What if I want him exactly as he is?" Maria smiled sadly. "Then you're going to have to convince him that you know what you're choosing and that you're choosing it anyway. That won't be easy. Cole spent 5 years believing he has nothing to offer anyone, that caring for people only puts them in danger. You'd have to show him different." Before Lila could respond, raised voices from the yard drew their attention. Through the window, she saw several ranch hands gathered near the barn, their postures tense, their expressions angry. Cole stood in the center of the group, his stance deceptively relaxed, but his hand resting near his gun belt in a way that suggested he was ready for trouble. "What's happening?" Lila asked, already moving toward the door. "Nothing good," Maria muttered, following her outside. They arrived just as one of the hands, a newer hire named Roberts, who Lila had never much liked, stepped forward with a newspaper clutched in his fist. "This is you, isn't it?" Roberts demanded, thrusting the paper at Cole. "This wanted poster, Cole Mercer, wanted for bank robbery and murder in Silver Falls. That's you." Cole didn't flinch, didn't reach for the paper, didn't show any reaction at all, except for a slight tightening around his eyes. "It is." The confirmation sent a ripple through the gathered men. Some looked shocked, others angry, a few merely curious. Robert's face twisted with righteous indignation. "And you've been here 5 years, working alongside honest men, and nobody thought to mention you're a wanted criminal?" "Everyone who matters knows," Cole said evenly. "Donovan knew before he hired me. The sheriff in Whispering Pines knows. Most of the hands who've been here more than a year know. It's not a secret." "Well, it's news to me," Robert spat, "and I don't take kindly to working with murderers and thieves. For all we know, you've been stealing from the ranch the whole time, or planning to rob us all in our sleep." "That's enough." Donovan's voice cut across the yard like a whip as he strode out from the barn, his expression thunderous. "Roberts, you're new here, so I'll explain this once. Cole Mercer was falsely accused of crimes he didn't commit. I know this because I've known him for 5 years, because I've seen his character tested 100 different ways, and because I trust him more than I trust most men I've known my whole life. If that's not good enough for you, you're welcome to collect your pay and ride out." Robert's face flushed dark red.
You're defending a wanted man? What kind of outfit are you running here? The kind where a man's judged by his actions, not by lies told about him by corrupt judges protecting their criminal sons, Donovan said coldly. The kind where loyalty and honor means something. The kind where we don't turn on our own because some self-righteous fool shows up with a 5-year-old warrant and no understanding of the actual facts. The facts are he's wanted by the law, Roberts insisted. The facts are there's probably a reward for turning him in. The facts are... Didn't get to finish because Cole moved with startling speed, closing the distance between them and yanking the newspaper from Robert's grip. The facts, Cole said quietly, his voice deadly calm, are that you're looking for an excuse to cause trouble and a reason to collect blood money. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to collect your wages from Miss Granger, you're going to pack your gear, and you're going to be off this ranch by sundown. If you even think about reporting my whereabouts to the law, if you make any move that puts this ranch or these people in danger, you'll discover that some of the rumors about me are actually true. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Roberts looked around for support and found none. The other hands were watching with expressions that ranged from sympathetic to hostile, but all of them clearly sided with Cole over the troublemaker. "You can't throw me off," Roberts blustered. "I got rights." "You got the right to leave peacefully," Donovan said, "or the right to be forcibly removed. Your choice." Roberts looked between Donovan and Cole, seemed to measure his odds, and apparently decided discretion was the better part of valor. "Fine. But don't think this is over. Law's got a right to know there's a wanted man working here." "The law already knows," Cole said tiredly. "Sheriff Aldwin's known for 5 years. He's seen the evidence, knows the charges are false, and has chosen not to pursue it. If you want to make trouble, you're welcome to try. But you should know that every man on this ranch will testify to my character, and the sheriff will tell you exactly what he thinks of people who try to collect bounties on innocent men." Robert spat in the dust at Cole's feet, a gesture of contempt that made several of the hands reach for their guns, then turned and stalked toward the bunkhouse. The moment he was gone, the tension broke. Tommy clapped Cole on the shoulder while other hands muttered support and apologies for Robert's behavior. Donovan watched them with satisfaction, then caught Lila's eye and nodded toward the house. Inside Donovan's study, with the door closed against curious ears, Lila finally found her voice. "Is he going to cause trouble? Roberts, I mean. Will he actually go to the law?" "Probably," Donovan said wearily, pouring himself a whiskey and offering one to Cole, who shook his head. "But it won't matter. Sheriff Aldwin's a good man who knows the truth. He'll listen politely to Robert's accusations, thank him for his civic duty, and then explain very clearly that pursuing false charges against innocent men isn't something his office engages in." Cole stood at the window, his back to them, tension visible in every line of his body. "Maybe I should move on. I've stayed here too long anyway, gotten too comfortable. It was only a matter of time before something like this happened." "What? Don't be ridiculous," Donovan said sharply. "You're not going anywhere. This is your home, Cole. You've earned your place here 100 times over. One ignorant fool with a newspaper doesn't change that." "It's not just about me anymore, though, is it?" Cole turned to face them, and Lila saw something raw and painful in his expression. "Every time someone like Roberts shows up, every time that warrant gets dragged out and examined, it puts the ranch at risk. Puts you at risk, Donovan. And now," his eyes found Lila's, "now it puts Miss Granger at risk too. People will talk. They'll say she's living on a ranch that employs a wanted criminal. It'll damage her reputation." "I don't give a damn about my reputation," Lila said fiercely, surprised by her own vehemence. "And I don't appreciate you making decisions about what's good for me without consulting me first. I know about the charges against you, Mr. Mercer. I know they're false. I know you're a good man who's been dealt a terrible injustice. None of that changes because some bigoted fool showed up with a 5-year-old warrant." Cole stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or the first crack in that careful wall he'd built. "You can't possibly understand what you're saying. The consequences of associating with me." "I understand perfectly well," Lila interrupted. "I understand that you buried my father when you could have ridden on. I understand that you've shown me nothing but kindness and respect. I understand that every person on this ranch who's actually worth knowing trusts you completely. That's all I need to understand."
Lila's right, Donovan added quietly. You've punished yourself long enough for crimes you didn't commit, Cole. You've isolated yourself, kept people at arm's length, convinced yourself you don't deserve connection or comfort. But that stops now. You're not leaving this ranch, you're not running again, and you're damn well not making decisions about what's best for other people without giving them a say in the matter. Cole's jaw worked, emotions warring across his face. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Then he nodded slowly, something like surrender in the gesture. All right, I'll stay. But if this brings trouble down on the ranch, then we'll face it together, Donovan said firmly. The way we face everything else. As a family. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lila saw Cole's throat work, saw him blink rapidly against what might have been tears, and felt her own eyes sting in sympathy. This man who'd lost so much, who'd been betrayed so deeply, was finally allowing himself to believe he might have found something worth keeping. The confrontation with Roberts proved to be exactly the catalyst Lila hadn't known she needed. Something shifted after that day. Some barrier between her and Cole that had been slowly crumbling finally gave way completely. He stopped keeping such careful distance, stopped editing his words and monitoring his expressions around her. They began to talk, really talk, during chance encounters in the barn or the office. Conversations that ranged from ranch business to books they'd read to dreams they'd once held and lost. Lila learned that Cole had wanted to be a lawyer before his world collapsed, that he'd believed in justice and law with the fervor of the young and idealistic. She learned that he read poetry late at night when sleep wouldn't come, that he could quote Shakespeare and Whitman from memory, that there was a mind sharp and hungry for knowledge trapped in the body of a cowboy. And Cole learned about Lila's life before the trail, about her mother who'd died too young and her father who'd tried so hard to be both parents. He learned that she'd once dreamed of attending college back east, that she spoke 3 languages and could solve complex mathematical equations in her head, that she'd sacrificed her own ambitions to care for her aging father and had never once regretted it. They became friends first, then something more than friends but less than lovers, existing in that strange liminal space where every conversation felt charged with unspoken possibility. August arrived with brutal heat and the constant work of preparing for the autumn cattle drive. Lila threw herself into the planning with characteristic intensity, learning the complex logistics of moving hundreds of cattle across dangerous terrain to the railhead in Cheyenne. She worked side by side with Cole to coordinate supplies, plan routes, arrange for additional hands, and ensure every detail was accounted for. "You don't have to do this," Cole said one evening as they pored over maps in Donovan's study, the house quiet around them. "The drive is dangerous work. You could stay here and manage things from the ranch." "I could," Lila agreed, "but I want to understand the full scope of the operation. How can I accurately project costs and risks if I've never actually seen what the drive entails?" Cole looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his storm cloud eyes. "You're not like anyone I've ever met, Lila Granger." The use of her first name, without the formal Miss, sent a small thrill through her. "Is that good or bad?" "Good," he said quietly. "Definitely good. You're smart and capable and brave in ways most people never manage. Your father would be proud of who you've become." The compliment, delivered with such simple sincerity, made Lila's throat tight. "I hope so. I'm trying to build the kind of life he wanted for me, one with purpose and meaning and the courage to face hard things." "You're succeeding," Cole said. Then after a pause, "Though I worry sometimes that you're facing harder things than you need to, that being here, being associated with me and my reputation, is making your life more difficult than it should be." "Stop that," Lila said firmly. "Stop trying to protect me from choices I'm making with full knowledge and consent. I'm not some fragile flower who needs shielding from reality, Cole. I'm a grown woman who's survived things that would have broken weaker people. Your past doesn't scare me. What scares me is the thought of you running again, of losing the friendship we've built because you've convinced yourself you're not worth caring about." Cole's breath caught audibly. "Lila, I mean it," she continued, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Whatever this is between us, friendship or something more, I value it. I value you."
And I'm tired of watching you hold yourself at a distance because you think you're protecting me. I don't need protection. I need honesty." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they hadn't said. Cole stood slowly, came around the desk, and stopped close enough that Lila could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, could smell the scent of leather and sage that clung to his skin. "The honest truth," he said quietly, "is that I care about you far more than I should. The honest truth is that I think about you constantly, when I'm working, when I'm trying to sleep, when I should be focused on anything else. The honest truth is that you've become important to me in ways that terrify me, because everyone I've ever cared about has either betrayed me or been hurt because of me." Lila's heart was racing now, her breath coming fast. "And what if I'm willing to risk it anyway?" "Then you're braver than I am," Cole whispered, "because I look at you and I see everything I ever wanted and everything I can never have. I see a future I don't deserve and a happiness I'm afraid to reach for because I know how quickly it can all be destroyed." "Cole?" But before she could finish, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the house, and rain began hammering against the windows with sudden violence. Cole stepped back abruptly, the moment broken, professional distance reasserting itself like a door slamming shut. "Storm's here," he said unnecessarily, his voice rough. "I should get back to the bunkhouse. Make sure everything's secured." "Cole, wait." But he was already moving toward the door, already retreating behind those walls he'd built to keep himself safe. "Good night, Miss Granger. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow when the weather's cleared." Then he was gone, leaving Lila alone in the study with maps and ledgers and the echo of almost confessions hanging in the air. The storm that had interrupted them proved to be the leading edge of something much larger. For the next 3 days, rain hammered the ranch with relentless intensity, turning the ground to mud and the creeks to raging torrents. The cattle drive was postponed as everyone worked frantically to reinforce shelters, move stock to higher ground, and prevent the kind of catastrophic losses that could destroy a ranch's finances in a single season. Lila worked alongside the hands, ignoring Donovan's protest that she should stay safely in the house. She helped nail boards over windows, hauled supplies through ankle-deep mud, and kept meticulous records of every animal moved and every resource deployed. And through it all, she was acutely aware of Cole's presence, in the barn securing horses, on the ridge moving cattle, in the yard shouting orders over the roar of the storm. On the third night, as the rain finally began to ease, word came that the hands had lost track of Cole during the last cattle push. He'd been moving stragglers up from the low pastures, but when the others had returned to the ranch, he hadn't been with them. Lila's heart stopped. "How long has he been gone?" she demanded, catching Tommy's arm as he stumbled into the yard, soaked and exhausted. 2 hours? Maybe 3, Tommy said, his young face creased with worry. "Mr. Pierce sent riders out looking, but in this weather, in the dark." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. 2 hours in a storm like this, 2 hours in country that could kill even experienced riders, 2 hours with lightning splitting the sky and creeks running high enough to sweep a man and horse away like matchsticks. Lila thought about their last conversation, about the things they'd almost said, about the wall Cole had rebuilt between them just when she'd thought it might finally come down. She thought about losing him before she'd had the chance to tell him that she didn't care about his past, about warrants or accusations or any of it, that she cared about him, the man he was now, the man he'd proven himself to be through 5 years of honest work and quiet decency. She thought about her father's grave under that elm tree, and she knew with sudden certainty that she couldn't lose someone else she cared about without fighting for them first. "I'm going to look for him," she announced, already moving toward the barn. "Miss Granger, you can't," Tommy protested. "It's too dangerous. Mr. Pierce can fire me if he wants," Lila shot back. "But I'm not sitting here doing nothing while Cole's out there in this storm. Now, are you going to help me saddle a horse, or am I doing it myself?" Tommy looked torn between duty and understanding, then made his decision. "I'll help, but I'm riding with you, and we're taking lanterns and rope. And if Mr. Pierce asks, this was entirely my idea." They rode out into the teeth of the dying storm, following the route Tommy said Cole would have taken with the stragglers. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but the ground was treacherous,
every step a potential disaster. Lila gripped her reins with white-knuckled intensity and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. They found him an hour later, on foot, and leading his limping horse up from a swollen creek. He was soaked to the bone, favoring his left leg, and carrying a newborn calf wrapped in his jacket. When the light from their lanterns swept across his face, Lila saw exhaustion and pain, and something that might have been relief. "Cole!" She was off her horse before Tommy could stop her, splashing through the mud to reach him. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," he said automatically, though his voice was hoarse and his hands were shaking. "Horse threw a shoe crossing the creek, and I found this little one caught in the brush. Couldn't just leave her." Of course he couldn't. Even injured, even in danger, Cole Mercer couldn't leave a helpless creature to die. Lila felt something crack open in her chest, some final resistance to what she'd been feeling for weeks now. "You stubborn, impossible man," she said, but her voice was thick with emotion. "You could have died out here. But I didn't." Cole looked at her through the rain, his storm cloud eyes holding hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "Though I appreciate you coming to look for me. That was foolish and brave and exactly what I should have expected from you." "Someone had to," Lila said. "Someone had to show you that people care whether you make it home safe." Something shifted in Cole's expression, some wall finally crumbling for good. "Lila, don't," she interrupted. "Don't pull away again. Don't rebuild those walls. Not after this. Not after I've spent the last 3 hours terrified I'd lost you before I could tell you that I don't care about your past. I care about you. The man standing in front of me right now, the man who risks his life to save newborn calves and refuses to leave people behind and buries strangers with honor and respect. That's who I care about, Cole Mercer. And if you try to convince me I shouldn't, I swear I'll..." He kissed her. One moment she was standing in the rain, words pouring out of her in a desperate attempt to make him understand. The next, his free hand was cupped against her cheek, and his lips were on hers. And the storm, and the mud, and Tommy's shocked gasp all faded into insignificance. The kiss was gentle and fierce all at once, tasting of rain and desperation, and something that might have been hope. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole pressed his forehead against hers and whispered words that felt like a vow. "I come back safe because I have a reason now. You're my reason, Lila. You've been my reason since that first night I found you behind that wagon, though I didn't want to admit it. I can't promise you an easy life. I can't promise the past won't catch up with us, but I can promise that I'll keep coming back as long as you'll have me." Lila's hands fisted in his wet shirt, holding him close despite the rain and the cold and Tommy's presence and the calf bleeding between them. "I'll have you, Cole Mercer. False accusations and all. Now let's get you home before you catch your death and break that promise before I've even had a chance to properly claim it." They rode back to the ranch together through the last of the storm, Cole on Tommy's horse since his own was too lame to carry weight, Lila riding close enough that their stirrups bumped with every step. The newborn calf was wrapped in Cole's jacket and cradled carefully, and when they finally reached the barn, Donovan was waiting with dry blankets and hot coffee and a knowing look that suggested he'd anticipated this development long before either of them had admitted it. "About damn time," was all he said, wrapping Cole in a blanket and steering them both toward the house. "Maria's got hot water ready for baths, and I expect you both to get warm and dry before you catch pneumonia. We'll discuss this new development in the morning, after you've both had actual sleep and can think straight." But Lila didn't need sleep to think straight. She'd never been more certain of anything in her life than she was of this, of Cole, of the feeling that had been growing between them for months, of the future they might build together despite all the obstacles in their way. The storm had passed, both outside and in its wake, everything looked different, clearer, full of possibility. As she finally climbed the stairs to her room, wrapped in warm blankets and with Cole's kiss still burning on her lips, Lila thought about her father and the life he'd wanted for her. He'd dreamed of her finding love, finding safety, finding courage. She'd found all three in the most unexpected place, and she wasn't letting any of it go. Morning brought clarity and consequences in equal measure. Lila woke to pale sunlight streaming through her window and the realization that everything had changed the night before. She'd kissed Cole Mercer in the rain, had told him she cared about him, had claimed a future with a wanted man whose past could destroy them both. And she didn't regret a single second of it. She dressed quickly in a clean work dress and braided her hair with fingers that trembled slightly from anticipation rather than nerves. Whatever conversation awaited her downstairs with Donovan, whatever questions needed answering about her relationship with his foreman, she was ready to face them. She'd meant what she'd said last night. She wasn't backing away from this, from Cole, from the possibility of building something real together. She found Donovan in the dining room, drinking coffee and reading correspondence with the focused intensity he brought to all business matters. He glanced up as she entered, his expression giving nothing away. "Coffee's fresh," he said mildly. "Maria made those cinnamon rolls you like. Help yourself." Lila poured coffee with hands steadier than she'd expected and took the seat across from him. "Where's Cole?" "Already out checking on the cattle we moved during the storm. Man barely slept 3 hours before he was up and working." Donovan set down his papers and fixed her with a look that was equal parts paternal concern and pragmatic assessment. "We need to talk, Lila." "I know." "Do you?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Do you understand what you're walking into with Cole? Not just the romance of it, the actual practical reality of caring for a man who's wanted by the law, who can't clear his name, who might have to run at any moment if the wrong person decides to make trouble." "I understand," Lila said quietly. "I understand that it's complicated and difficult and potentially dangerous. I understand that people will judge me for it, that it could affect my reputation and my prospects. I understand all of that, Donovan, and I'm choosing it anyway." "Why?" The question was blunt but not unkind. "You're young, educated, beautiful. You could have your pick of suitors, men without warrants hanging over their heads, men who could offer you security and respectability without reservation. Why choose the hardest path?" Lila thought about the question, about all the easy answers she could give. Because Cole saved her father's grave. Because he'd been kind when she needed it most. Because he made her feel safe and seen and valued. But the truth was simpler and more profound than any of those things. "Because when I'm with him, I'm not afraid," she said finally. "I've spent 3 months being terrified. Terrified I'd lose everything. Terrified I wouldn't survive out here alone. Terrified the grief would swallow me whole. But when I'm with Cole, all that fear quiets. He doesn't try to protect me from the hard things or pretend the world is gentler than it is. He just stands beside me and makes me believe I'm strong enough to face whatever comes. That's worth more to me than all the security and respectability in the world." Donovan's expression softened. "He feels the same way about you, you know. Told me this morning that you'd given him something he thought he'd lost forever when he was framed. Hope. Said you made him remember what it felt like to want a future instead of just enduring the present." Lila's throat tightened. "He said that?" "He did. Also asked my permission to court you properly, which I found both respectful and slightly amusing given that you two already declared yourselves to each other in the middle of a thunderstorm." Donovan's lips quirked. "I told him he had my blessing, provided certain conditions were met." "What conditions?" "That he be honest with you about the risks, that he not make promises he can't keep, that he remember you're not just his salvation, but a person with your own dreams and needs and desires." Donovan's gaze sharpened. "And that if he ever hurts you, intentionally or otherwise, he'll answer to me." "He won't hurt me," Lila said with certainty. "At least not intentionally, and unintentional hurt is part of any relationship. I'm not so naive as to expect perfection." "Good. Because you won't get it, not from Cole and not from anyone else." Donovan stood, came around the table and rested a hand on her shoulder with unexpected gentleness. "Your father asked me to look after you, Lila. That means supporting your choices even when they scare me, and this one scares me. Not because of Cole. I trust him with my life, but because loving someone whose future is uncertain requires a kind of courage most people never have to find. I need to know you're prepared for that." Lila covered his hand with hers, thinking about her father dying on a dusty trail, about the uncertainty that had brought her west, about all the ways life could shatter in an instant, regardless of how carefully you planned. "I'm as prepared as anyone can be, and I'd rather face an uncertain future with Cole than a safe, predictable one with someone I don't love." "Fair enough."
Donovan squeezed her shoulder once, then stepped back. Then you have my full support. Cole's a good man who deserves happiness, and you're a good woman who deserves the same. If you two can find it together, I'll do everything in my power to help you keep it. The conversation left Lila feeling simultaneously lighter and more weighted with responsibility. This wasn't just a romance, it was a commitment with real consequences, requiring real courage. But as she threw herself into the day's work, checking on storm damage and reorganizing supply inventories, she felt no doubt about her choice. Cole found her late that afternoon in the barn, checking on the calf he'd rescued the night before. The little creature was nursing from a wet nurse cow, healthy and vigorous, despite her traumatic arrival into the world. Lila was so focused on taking notes about the calf's condition that she didn't hear Cole approach until he spoke. She's doing well, stubborn thing, just like the woman who helped save her. Lila turned to find him leaning against a stall door, his hat in his hands, his expression uncertain in a way she'd never seen before. This was Cole without his walls, without his careful distance, and the vulnerability in his storm cloud eyes made her heart ache. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "About last night, about what happens now." Lila set down her notes and moved closer, close enough to see the faint scar along his jawline, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of too little sleep. "I know what happens now. We figure this out together. We build something real despite all the complications." "Lila," he said her name like a prayer and a warning both. "I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. It's not just about me being wanted, though that's part of it. It's about the fact that I can't give you the life most women want. I can't take you to fancy social events without risking recognition. I can't promise we'll always be able to stay in one place. I can't even promise we could marry legally, not while there's a warrant with my name on it." "Do you want to marry me?" The question came out before Lila could think better of it, direct and unflinching. Cole's breath caught. "That's not—" "I'm trying to explain." "Do you want to marry me?" Lila repeated, stepping closer. "Not theoretically, not someday if circumstances were different. Right now, as things are, with all the complications and risks and impossibilities. Do you want to build a life with me?" "Yes." The word was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of complete truth. "God help me, yes. I've wanted that since the night I watched you stand brave in the rain, refusing to let me run from something that mattered. But wanting something and being able to have it are different things, Lila. I won't trap you in a half-life because I'm selfish enough to take what I want regardless of the cost." Lila reached up and cupped his face in her hands, feeling the rough stubble under her palms, the way he leaned into her touch like a man starving for gentleness. "You're not trapping me. You're offering me exactly what I want. A life built on honesty and courage and real partnership. I don't need fancy social events or legal documents or guarantees about the future. I need you, Cole Mercer. That's all. Just you." "You deserve better," he said, but there was no conviction in it now, just the last gasp of old fears trying to maintain their hold. "I deserve what I choose," Lila corrected. "And I choose this. I choose you. Now, are you going to keep arguing with me, or are you going to kiss me again like you did last night?" Cole's laugh was shaky, but genuine. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "Good thing you like stubborn, then." Lila rose on her toes, closing the distance between them. "Now kiss me, Cowboy, before I change my mind." He kissed her in the golden light of the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses and the soft sounds of animals settling for the evening. It was slower than the desperate kiss in the rain, sweeter and deeper, a promise rather than a plea. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers and spoke words that sounded like a vow. "I'll do everything in my power to give you a good life, Lila. I'll work honestly, protect you fiercely, and love you with everything I have. That's the best I can promise, but I promise it absolutely." "That's all I need," Lila whispered. "Your honesty, your protection, and your love. Everything else, we'll figure out together." They stood there for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms as the evening light turned golden around them, both of them knowing this was a beginning, not an easy one, but a real one. A beginning built on truth and courage, and the kind of love that didn't flinch from hard realities. The weeks that followed brought both joy and challenge in equal measure.
Cole's relationship with Lila became an open secret on the ranch, accepted by most with varying degrees of approval and curiosity. The hands who'd worked with Cole for years seemed pleased to see their foreman finally allowing himself happiness. Maria offered enthusiastic support in the form of knowing looks and extra helpings of Cole's favorite foods. Tommy developed an annoying habit of whistling romantic ballads whenever Lila and Cole were in the same vicinity, but not everyone was pleased. In town, gossip spread quickly about the bookkeeper from the Pierce Ranch taking up with a wanted man. Some of the more respectable matrons made pointed comments about fallen women and poor judgment. The new minister preached a sermon about the importance of moral discernment that everyone understood was directed at Lila. Mrs. Hendricks defended her fiercely, as did Sheriff Aldwin, but the whispers continued. "Let them talk," Cole said one evening as they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the western sky. "Their opinions don't matter." "Easy for you to say," Lila replied, though without real bitterness. "You're used to being judged. I'm still learning how to develop a thick skin." "You don't need thick skin. You need to remember that the only opinions that matter are your own and those of people who actually know you." He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Do you regret this? Us?" "Never," Lila said immediately.
But I won't lie and say it doesn't hurt, hearing people say cruel things about something that's good and true.
"I know." Cole brought her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "And I'm sorry you're bearing that burden because of me. If there was any way I could shield you from it—" "There isn't, and I don't need shielding," Lila interrupted. "I just need you to remember that we're in this together. Your reputation isn't yours alone anymore. It's ours. Your past isn't something I'm tolerating. It's something I'm choosing to face beside you." Cole's expression shifted to something raw and vulnerable. "I love you, Lila Granger. I don't think I've said that plainly enough, without qualifications or warnings. I love you completely, and without reservation. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, hope for a future worth living." Lila's eyes filled with tears, though she was smiling. "I love you too, Cole Mercer.
With all your complications and your stubborn nobility and your ridiculous attempts to protect me from my own choices. I love all of it, all of you." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in shades of fire and gold, and Lila thought about how far she'd traveled from that terrible day behind the wagon. She'd lost her father, lost her old life, lost everything she'd thought she'd known about her future. But in losing all of that, she'd found something infinitely more precious. Love that didn't ask her to be anything other than herself, partnership built on honesty and courage, and a man who saw her strength and never tried to diminish it. As autumn deepened and the cattle drive finally commenced in late September, Lila insisted on accompanying the hands despite both Donovan's and Cole's protests. "I need to understand the full operation," she argued, reviewing maps in Donovan's study. "How can I accurately project future costs if I've never seen what actually happens on the trail?" "It's dangerous work," Cole said for the third time that evening. 2 weeks of hard riding, unpredictable weather, potential conflicts with other ranchers over grazing rights. This isn't like working in the barn or checking fence lines. "I'm aware," Lila said patiently, "which is exactly why I need to see it firsthand. Besides, you're going to be gone for 2 weeks. You really think I'm going to stay here and worry myself sick when I could be useful and see you every day?" Cole and Donovan exchanged glances, and Lila could see the moment they both recognized defeat. "She's got a point," Donovan said with resignation. "And she's right, that understanding the drive would improve her ability to manage the business side. We've taken women on drives before when circumstances required it." "Fine," Cole conceded. "But you ride near me at all times. You follow orders without argument, and if anything goes wrong, you get to safety first. Agreed?" "Agreed," Lila said, though she had no intention of abandoning anyone to danger just to save herself. But that was an argument for another day. The drive itself was everything Cole had warned and more. The work was brutal. Long days in the saddle, nights on hard ground, constant vigilance against cattle straying or predators threatening the herd. Lila discovered muscles she hadn't known existed, developed blisters that became calluses, and learned to sleep despite exhaustion so profound it felt like drowning. But she also discovered joy in the work. There was something profoundly satisfying about moving hundreds of cattle across the land, about working in perfect coordination with experienced hands who knew their jobs and did them well. She learned to anticipate the herd's movements, to spot trouble before it fully developed, to handle her horse with increasing confidence even in difficult terrain. And every evening, when the cattle were settled and the camp was made, she had stolen moments with Cole, sitting by the fire discussing the day's challenges, walking the perimeter together during watch shifts, sharing the kind of quiet companionship that deepened into genuine partnership. "You're good at this," Cole said one night as they checked the herd under a canopy of stars so dense it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. "Better than most hands I've worked with, and you've only been doing this for a week." "I had good teachers," Lila replied, guiding her horse alongside his, "and motivation to learn quickly. Can't have my cowboy thinking I'm useless in the field." "Never thought that," Cole said quietly. "From the first moment I met you, I knew you were strong. You pointed a gun at me with steady hands and clear eyes, even though you just watched your father die. That takes a kind of courage most people never find." Lila was quiet for a moment, thinking about that day, about how far she'd come from the terrified girl behind the wagon. "I was so scared, Cole. So completely terrified I could barely think. But you made it bearable. Your voice, your steadiness, it gave me something to hold on to when everything else was falling apart." "You gave me something too," Cole said. "You reminded me why I do this work, why I keep trying to be a good man even when the world's decided I'm not. Seeing you survive that day, watching you rebuild your life with such determination, it made me remember that resilience matters, that choosing to keep going despite everything matters." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them, cattle lowing softly, coyotes calling in the distance, the endless whisper of wind through grass. "I've been thinking," Lila said eventually, "about what happens after the drive, about where we go from here." Cole's posture tensed slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that we've been living in this strange limbo where we're together, but not really making plans for a future together. We talk around the subject of marriage, of building a permanent life, but we never actually discuss the specifics." She turned in her saddle to look at him directly. "I want specifics, Cole. I want to know what you actually want, not what you think is possible or practical or safe. What do you want?" Cole was quiet for so long that Lila thought he might not answer. Then he reined in his horse, dismounted, and offered his hand to help her down. When they were both standing on the dark prairie with nothing but stars and cattle for company, he took both her hands in his. "I want to marry you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Properly, legally, with witnesses and vows, and a ring that marks you as mine the way I'm already yours. I want to build a house on a piece of land Donovan's offered me, want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want children eventually, if you want them. Sons and daughters who'll grow up knowing their parents love each other and chose each other despite everything the world threw at them." Lila's breath caught. "Cole, but I also want you to be safe," he continued. "I want you to have the respect and security you deserve, and marrying a wanted man doesn't give you those things. So what I want and what I can actually offer you are two very different things, and I'm trying to be honest about that, even though it's killing me." "What if I told you I've been writing letters?" Lila said quietly. "To lawyers in Denver and Cheyenne and even back east. Letters about your case, about the possibility of reopening the investigation into the Silver Falls robbery." Cole went very still. "Lila, what did you do?" "I did what you wouldn't do for yourself. I started fighting for you." She squeezed his hands. "You gave up trying to clear your name because every door closed in your face, because the judge has power and money and influence. But you know what the judge doesn't have? Detailed financial records that prove you couldn't have committed the robbery because you were depositing your paycheck at a different bank at the exact time the crime occurred. Records that still exist, that I've requested and received, that establish a clear alibi." Cole stared at her, something like hope warring with disbelief on his face. Why would you?" "Because I love you," Lila said simply. "Because you deserve justice. Because I refuse to build our future on the foundation of lies someone else told about you. So yes, I've been writing letters and gathering evidence and corresponding with lawyers who actually care about truth rather than protecting corrupt judges. And yes, it's going to take time and money and persistence. But Cole, there's a real chance we could clear your name. A real chance you could stop running and start living fully.
That's impossible, Cole whispered, but Lila could hear the yearning underneath the disbelief. The judge is too powerful. The witnesses too well paid. The judge is powerful in Silver Falls, Lila corrected. But his influence doesn't extend everywhere, and there are federal prosecutors who've been looking into judicial corruption in that circuit for the past year. They're interested in your case, Cole. They're willing to review the evidence and consider reopening the investigation. Cole pulled his hands free and turned away, his shoulders rigid with tension. You shouldn't have done this. If the judge finds out someone's poking around in his business, he could come after you, could make trouble for Donovan, could what? Frame me for crimes I didn't commit? Threaten my livelihood? My reputation? Lila moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. Cole, all of those things are already happening because of our relationship. People already judge me, already whisper about my choices. At least this way I'm fighting for something that matters. At least this way we have a chance at a real future. I can't ask you to take these risks for me. You're not asking. I'm choosing. Lila reached up and cupped his face in her hands, felt the tremor running through him. I love you enough to fight for you, Cole Mercer. I love you enough to believe you deserve justice, even if you've given up believing it yourself. And I love you enough to keep fighting until either we succeed or every single legal avenue is exhausted. That's what love means to me. Not just accepting who you are, but fighting for who you could be if the world gave you half a chance. Cole's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't deserve you. Probably not, Lila agreed with a small smile. But you're stuck with me anyway. Now, are you going to keep arguing, or are you going to help me figure out how to use these bank records to prove your innocence? He kissed her then, hard and desperate, and full of everything he couldn't put into words. Gratitude and love and hope and fear all tangled together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers and spoke in a voice that shook. If you actually manage to clear my name, Lila Granger, I'm going to marry you so fast it'll make your head spin. I'm going to build you the finest house in Wyoming territory and fill it with every book you want and every comfort I can provide. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on a wanted man who didn't have the sense to give up when he should have. I'm counting on it, Lila whispered. Every word of it. The rest of the drive passed in a blur of hard work and stolen moments, of slowly building hope and the careful planning of a future that was starting to seem possible rather than impossible. When they finally delivered the cattle to the railhead in Cheyenne and collected payment, Donovan pulled Lila aside with an expression that was part pride, part concern. Cole told me what you've been doing, he said, about the letters and the lawyers and the bank records. Are you angry? Lila asked, though she already knew she'd do it again regardless of his answer. Angry? No. Concerned? Yes. Impressed? Absolutely. Donovan shook his head slowly. Your father would be proud of you, Lila. You've got his courage and his sense of justice. But I need you to understand that this fight you're picking with the judge, it's dangerous. These aren't good men who'll accept exposure gracefully. I know, Lila said, but it's worth the risk. Cole's worth the risk. He is, Donovan agreed, which is why I'm going to help you. I've got resources, connections, and a considerable amount of money I'm willing to invest in seeing justice done. If we're going to fight this battle, we're going to fight it properly, with the best lawyers and the most thorough investigation money can buy. Lila felt tears prick her eyes. Donovan, I can't ask you to... You're not asking, I'm offering. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Cole saved my life 3 years ago when rustlers tried to burn me out. He's been more than my foreman. He's been my friend, my right hand, the son I never had. If there's a chance to give him his life back, his name back, then I'm taking it. For him, and for you, and for the family you're trying to build together. The journey back to the ranch was triumphant and exhausting in equal measure. They'd secured excellent prices for the cattle, completed the drive without major incident, and returned with every hand accounted for and healthy. But underneath the celebration ran a current of anticipation and anxiety about what came next, about the legal battle they were preparing to fight, about the future they were trying to claim. Cole proposed officially on a clear October evening, kneeling on the ridge overlooking the ranch with his mother's ring. A simple gold band with a small sapphire that he'd carried for 5 years, never expecting to have cause to offer it. "This was my mother's," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion Lila could see in his eyes. "She died when I was 16, but before she passed, she told me to give this ring to a woman who saw me clearly and loved me anyway. A woman who was brave enough to build a life with me despite all the complications. A woman who made me want to be better than I was." He took Lila's hand, his grip warm and sure. "You're that woman, Lila. You've seen the worst of my circumstances and the truth of my character, and you've chosen to fight for us anyway. So I'm asking you now, officially and without reservation, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, knowing it might be complicated and difficult, but also knowing I'll love you with everything I have for as long as I live?" "Yes," Lila said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll build a life with you. I'll fight beside you until your name is cleared and our future is secure. Yes to all of it, Cole Mercer. Every complicated, difficult, beautiful bit of it." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all along for her to claim it. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, and they stood on that ridge watching the sun set over their land, the land where they'd build their house, raise their children, live the life they'd fought so hard to claim. "Thank you," Cole whispered into her hair, "for seeing me, for loving me, for refusing to let me settle for less than I deserved." "Thank you for being worth fighting for," Lila replied, "for being the man my father would have wanted for me, honest and brave and capable of building something good even in harsh circumstances." They stood there as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful anyway. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were still legal battles to fight, reputations to rebuild, prejudices to overcome. But standing there in Cole's arms with his mother's ring on her finger, Lila felt certain of one thing. They would face it all together, and together they would prevail. The announcement of their engagement was met with mixed reactions in Whispering Pines and on the ranch, but the people who mattered, Donovan, Maria, Tommy, Sheriff Aldwin, Mrs. Hendricks, offered their wholehearted support and blessing. Plans were made for a December wedding, small and simple but genuine, a celebration of love that had survived doubt and fear and the weight of an unjust past. And as autumn faded into early winter, as the legal machinery slowly ground forward on Cole's case, as they began to sketch plans for the house they'd build come spring, Lila thought about her father's last word to her: live. She was living, fully, courageously, with her whole heart engaged. She'd survived loss and grief and the harsh reality of frontier life. She'd found love in the most unexpected place, with the most unexpected person. And she'd discovered that sometimes the hardest paths led to the most precious destinations. Her father would have approved. Of that, she was absolutely certain. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it snow that transformed the ranch into something out of a fairy tale and news that would change everything. The letter came on a Tuesday morning in mid-November, delivered by a writer from Cheyenne who'd pushed hard through the cold to reach them. Lila recognized the law firm's letterhead immediately. Morrison and Associates, the attorneys she'd been corresponding with for months about Cole's case. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal, Cole standing beside her in Donovan's study, his face carefully blank in that way he had when he was bracing for disappointment. She read quickly, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. "They've done it," she whispered, then louder, her voice breaking with emotion. "Cole, they've done it. The federal prosecutor has agreed to reopen the case. They've reviewed the bank records, interviewed witnesses who recanted their testimony, and found evidence that the judge's son was in significant debt at the time of the robbery. They're issuing a formal statement clearing you of all charges and recommending an investigation into judicial misconduct." Cole went absolutely still, his face draining of color. "That's not possible. The judge would never allow—" "The judge is under investigation himself now," Lila continued, scanning the letter with shaking hands. "Apparently your case wasn't the first time he manipulated evidence to protect his son. There are 3 other cases being reviewed, and federal prosecutors are building a corruption case against him. Cole, they're not just clearing your name, they're going after the people who framed you." The letter fell from Lila's fingers as Cole staggered backward, catching himself against Donovan's desk. For a long moment, he couldn't speak, couldn't seem to process what he'd just heard. Then he looked at Lila with eyes that held 5 years of pain and disbelief and desperate, fragile hope. "Are you telling me I'm free? That I can stop running, stop hiding, stop looking over my shoulder, waiting for someone to recognize me and turn me in?" "You're telling him exactly that," Donovan said from the doorway, his own voice rough with emotion. He'd been listening, had heard everything, and now he crossed the room to grip Cole's shoulder with fierce affection. "You're a free man, Cole Mercer. The warrant's been vacated, your name's been cleared, and you've got official documentation proving your innocence. It's over. It's finally over." Cole's knees buckled, and he would have fallen if Lila hadn't caught him, wrapping her arms around him as 5 years of tension and fear and carefully maintained control finally shattered. He buried his face in her shoulder and shook with silent sobs that tore at Lila's heart even as joy flooded through her veins. "I've got you," she whispered, holding him tight. "You're safe now. You're free. And we're going to build that life we planned, without looking over our shoulders, without fear, just like we promised." It took Cole several minutes to compose himself, and when he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clear, his expression transformed by something Lila had never fully seen there before. Unguarded hope. Not the careful, tentative hope he'd allowed himself when she'd first told him about the lawyers, but real, solid hope that the future might actually be different than the past. "I need to see it in writing," he said, his voice steadier now. "Need to hold that official document in my hands and know it's real, not just another cruel dream." "It's real," Lila assured him, retrieving the letter and pressing it into his hands. "Read it yourself, every word." Cole read slowly, carefully, his lips moving slightly as he processed each sentence. Lila watched emotions chase across his face, disbelief giving way to cautious acceptance, giving way to something that looked like joy mixed with grief for all the years he'd lost. "They apologize," he said wonderingly. "The prosecutor actually apologizes on behalf of the justice system for the miscarriage of justice I suffered. Says I'm entitled to compensation for wrongful prosecution." "You are entitled," Donovan said firmly, "and you should claim every penny. Use it to build that house you've been planning, to start the horse breeding operation you've always wanted, to give yourself and Lila the foundation you deserve." Cole looked at the letter again, then at Lila, then at Donovan. "I don't know what to say. I spent 5 years believing this would never happen, that I'd die with those false charges still hanging over my head. And now—" He shook his head slowly. "Now everything's different. Now I can actually marry Lila legally, can put my real name on property deeds, can build a life without constantly waiting for it all to fall apart. Now you can live," Lila said softly. "Really live. Not just survive. That's what my father wanted for me, and it's what I want for both of us." The next weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Official documents arrived clearing Cole's name and outlining the compensation he was entitled to, a sum substantial enough to build a house and start his breeding operation with resources to spare. The story of his exoneration spread through Whispering Pines and the surrounding ranches, transforming him overnight from a man people whispered about to something of a local hero who'd survived injustice with his integrity intact. The wedding date was confirmed for December 20th, just before Christmas, in the small church in Whispering Pines. Lila threw herself into preparations with Maria's enthusiastic help, ordering a dress from a dressmaker in Cheyenne, planning a simple but meaningful ceremony, coordinating with the minister who'd preached that sermon about moral discernment and now couldn't apologize enough for his presumption. "I judged you without knowing the full story," Reverend Morrison said when he came to the ranch to discuss the ceremony. "I let town gossip influence my opinion rather than seeking truth. I'm deeply sorry, Miss Granger, and I'd be honored to officiate your wedding if you'll allow me to make amends." "I'll allow it on one condition," Lila said, "that you remember this lesson the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on rumors and reputation rather than character and truth." "I will," the Reverend promised. "You have my word." Cole spent his days working with a carpenter from Cheyenne to design the house they'd build come spring, his evenings with Lila planning their future with the kind of detail that was only possible when you actually believed the future would arrive. They pored over breeding records for horses,
discussed business strategies for the operation, debated the merits of various building materials and floor plans. "I want a big kitchen," Lila insisted one evening as they reviewed sketches by lamplight, "with windows facing east so I can watch the sunrise while I work, and a library, a real library with floor-to-ceiling shelves for all the books we'll collect. And a wide front porch," Cole added, penciling modifications onto the architect's drawings. "Big enough for rocking chairs and summer evenings, where we can watch our children play in the yard." The casual mention of children made Lila's heart skip. They'd discussed it in abstract terms before, but this felt different, more immediate, more possible. "How many children are we planning for in this future of ours?" Cole looked up from the drawings, his storm cloud eyes warm. "However many we're blessed with, 2 or 10, it doesn't matter to me. I just want them to grow up knowing they're loved and that their parents chose each other despite everything." 2 or 10 is quite a range, Lila said with a laugh. "But I'm willing to see where life takes us, though maybe we start with 1 and see how we manage before committing to 10. "Sounds reasonable." Cole reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb brushing over the sapphire ring that marked her as his. "I can't believe this is real sometimes, that I get to have this, you, a home, a future without fear. It feels like something I dreamed up during long nights when hope seemed impossible." "It's real," Lila assured him, "and it's ours. We fought for it, and now we get to claim it." The week before the wedding brought unexpected complications in the form of a visitor from Silver Falls. Lila was working in the office when Maria came to tell her that a well-dressed stranger had arrived asking to speak with Cole Mercer on urgent business. "He says his name is Jonathan Fletcher," Maria said, her expression uncertain. "Says he was Cole's defense attorney at the original trial, and he's come to apologize in person." Lila found Cole in the barn, told him about the visitor, and watched carefully calibrated anger flash across his face. "Fletcher abandoned me when I needed him most," Cole said flatly. "Took my money, promised a vigorous defense, then barely presented evidence at the trial. I don't want to see him." "Maybe you should anyway," Lila suggested gently. "Not for him, for you. Hear what he has to say, and then decide whether his apology means anything." Cole was quiet for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but you're coming with me. I want a witness to whatever excuses he offers." Jonathan Fletcher was a man in his 50s with gray hair and the kind of defeated posture that suggested he carried significant regrets. He stood in Donovan's parlor, hat in hand, and when Cole entered the room, genuine remorse crossed his features. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for seeing me. I know I have no right to your time or your forgiveness, but I felt I owed you an explanation." "You owe me more than an explanation," Cole said coldly. "You took my money and my trust and threw both away when the judge made it clear he expected you to lose." "You're right, and I've spent 5 years living with the knowledge that my cowardice condemned an innocent man." Fletcher's hands tightened on his hat. "The judge threatened my practice, threatened my family, made it clear that if I fought too hard for you, I'd lose everything. So I made the calculation that my security mattered more than your justice, and I've hated myself for it every day since." "That's supposed to make me feel better?" Cole demanded. "That you knowingly sacrificed me to save yourself?" "No. Nothing I say can make this better." Fletcher met Cole's eyes squarely. "I came here to tell you that I provided testimony to the federal prosecutors about the judge's threats, about the corruption I witnessed, about my own failure to uphold my ethical obligations. My testimony helped build the case against the judge. It's a small thing, inadequate recompense for what I cost you, but it's what I could offer." Cole stared at him, anger warring with something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "Why now? Why come forward after 5 years?" "Because your case has been all over the newspapers. Because seeing you exonerated reminded me what it costs to stay silent in the face of injustice. Because I have a daughter your age, and I couldn't look her in the eye knowing I'd failed someone else's child so completely." Fletcher's voice roughened. "I don't expect forgiveness, Mr. Mercer. I just wanted you to know that some of us who failed you are trying to make it right, even if it's too little too late." Lila watched Cole struggle with the apology, saw the tension in his shoulders gradually ease. Finally he spoke, his voice still hard but no longer quite so angry.
I appreciate you coming forward to the prosecutors. That took courage, even if it should have happened 5 years ago. But I can't forgive you, Mr. Fletcher. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You made choices that cost me years of my life, and that's not something I can just overlook because you feel guilty now. I understand, Fletcher said quietly. For what it's worth, I'm glad you found happiness despite what I failed to prevent. Miss Granger is a remarkable woman to fight for your exoneration the way she did. You're fortunate to have her. I know, Cole said, and some of the hardness left his expression. She gave me back my life when everyone else, including you, had decided it wasn't worth saving. That's something I'll never forget. After Fletcher left, Cole stood at the window staring out at the snow-covered ranch, his expression distant. Lila came to stand beside him, not touching but close enough that he could feel her presence. Are you all right? She asked quietly. I don't know. Part of me wanted to rage at him, to make him feel even a fraction of what I felt when he abandoned my defense. But another part of me just feels tired of carrying anger, tired of letting the past define my present. Cole turned to look at her. You helped me see that it's possible to move forward without forgetting, to acknowledge what happened without letting it consume me. Fletcher's apology doesn't erase what he did, but it does close a door I've been leaving open for 5 years. That's growth, Lila said softly. That's healing, and it's a good sign for our future, that you can face your past without being destroyed by it. Cole pulled her into his arms, resting his chin on top of her head. I love you, Lila Granger. Thank you for teaching me that healing is possible, that the future doesn't have to be defined by the past. I love you too, Lila whispered. And in 6 days, we're getting married and starting that future we've fought so hard for. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the world in pristine white. Lila woke in her room at the ranch for the last time as an unmarried woman, her dress hanging on the wardrobe door, her heart full of anticipation and joy and just the slightest flutter of nerves. Maria came to help her dress, fussing over the gown's fit and the placement of the simple veil Lila had chosen. The dress itself was beautiful, deep blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs that Maria had added as a wedding gift. Your father would be so proud, Maria said, tears in her eyes as she fastened the last button. You look like an angel, Nina. Cole is a lucky man. I'm lucky too, Lila said, examining her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the terrified girl who'd hidden behind a wagon 6 months ago. This woman was strong and sure, marked by grief but not broken by it, ready to claim the future she'd fought for. The church was decorated with evergreen boughs and white candles, simple but beautiful. The pews were filled with ranch hands and townspeople, with Sheriff Aldwin and Mrs. Hendricks and Tommy Birch wearing his best suit and looking uncharacteristically serious. Donovan waited to walk her down the aisle, his expression a mixture of pride and paternal affection. Your father asked me to look after you, he said quietly as they waited for the ceremony to begin. I think he'd be pleased with how things turned out. You found a good man who loves you, built a life of purpose and meaning, shown more courage than most people find in a lifetime. I know I'm not your father, Lila, but I'm proud of you, deeply, genuinely proud. Lila's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Donovan, for everything, for taking me in, for supporting my relationship with Cole, for helping fight for his exoneration. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You could have, Donovan corrected gently, but I'm glad you didn't have to. Now, let's get you married before Cole decides you've changed your mind and comes looking for you. The ceremony was everything Lila had hoped for, simple and heartfelt and achingly beautiful. Cole stood at the altar in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his storm cloud eyes fixed on her as she walked down the aisle with an intensity that made breathing difficult. When she reached him and Donovan placed her hand in his, she felt the slight tremor in Cole's fingers and knew he was as moved as she was. Reverend Morrison conducted the ceremony with genuine warmth, speaking about love that overcomes obstacles and courage that transforms difficult circumstances into opportunities for growth. When it came time for vows, Cole spoke first, his voice steady and sure. Lila, when I found you behind that wagon 6 months ago, I was a man who'd given up on happiness, who'd convinced himself that survival was enough. You showed me different. You showed me that even broken things can be made whole, that even the hardest circumstances can lead to beautiful outcomes. You fought for me when I'd stopped fighting for myself, believed in me when I'd stopped believing. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that faith. I promise to love you with everything I have, to build a life with you that honors both the pain we've survived and the joy we've found. I promise to be your partner in all things, your safe harbor in every storm, and the man who chooses you every single day for as long as we both live. Lila's tears flowed freely as she spoke her own vows. Cole, my father's last word to me was live. For a long time, I thought that just meant surviving, getting through each day despite the grief. But you taught me that living means so much more. It means choosing courage over fear, hope over despair, connection over isolation. You've given me a reason to live fully, to build something beautiful in harsh country, to believe that love can triumph over even the worst injustice. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to fight for our future with the same determination I fought for your exoneration, and to love you with my whole heart for as long as we both draw breath. When Reverend Morrison pronounced them husband and wife and invited Cole to kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was tender and deep and full of promise. The small congregation erupted in applause and cheers, and Lila found herself laughing through her tears as Cole swept her into his arms and held her close. "Hello, Mrs. Mercer," he whispered against her hair. "Hello, Mr. Mercer," she whispered back. "Ready to start that life we planned?" "I've been ready since the moment you pointed a gun at me and decided I was worth trusting," Cole said with a smile. "Let's go build something extraordinary." The reception at the ranch was warm and joyful, full of good food and music and dancing. Lila danced with Donovan and Tommy and Sheriff Aldwin, but most of all she danced with her husband, moving through the steps of simple waltzes while the fire crackled and snow fell gently outside the windows. Late in the evening, as guests began to depart and the celebration wound down, Lila and Cole slipped away to the ridge overlooking the ranch, the same ridge where Cole had proposed, where they'd watched sunsets and made plans for their future. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead, and they stood wrapped in each other's arms, looking out over the land that would be theirs. "Thank you," Cole said quietly, "for refusing to let me settle for less than I deserved, for fighting when I'd given up, for loving me enough to change everything." "You did the same for me," Lila replied. "You saved me when I needed it most, showed me that strength could coexist with gentleness, that hope was possible even in the darkest circumstances. We saved each other, Cole. That's what makes this work." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars wheel overhead and the distant lights of the ranch below. Then Cole spoke again, his voice full of wonder. "Do you ever think about that day? The day your father died and I rode up to help you?" "Often," Lila admitted. "It was the worst day of my life and the beginning of the best thing that ever happened to me. Strange how that works, how something so terrible can lead to something so beautiful." "Not strange," Cole said. "Just life. Just the way hard things and good things are all tangled together, and you can't have one without the other. Your father's death was a tragedy, but it brought you to me, brought us to this moment. I like to think he'd be pleased with how things turned out." "He would be," Lila said with certainty. "He wanted me to be safe and loved and strong enough to face whatever came. You've given me all of that and more." Winter deepened after the wedding, bringing heavy snows that blanketed the ranch and forced everyone into the kind of close quarters that either destroyed relationships or strengthened them. For Lila and Cole, now living together in a small house on the ranch while their permanent home was being built, it was decidedly the latter. They learned each other's rhythms and routines, discovered how to navigate disagreements with honesty and respect, built the kind of deep partnership that would sustain them through whatever came next. By February, Lila knew she was pregnant. The realization came gradually. A missed monthly course, morning nausea that Maria noticed before Lila fully registered it, a tenderness in her breast that made her usual corset uncomfortable. When she finally confirmed it with Maria's help, she felt a mixture of joy and terror that left her breathless. She told Cole on a clear February evening as they sat by the fire in their small house, her hands trembling as she took his and placed them on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said simply, watching his face carefully. Probably late summer or early fall, if my calculations are right. Cole's expression went through a dozen different emotions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, joy, fear, and finally a kind of wonder that made Lila's heart ache with love for him. A baby, he repeated, as if testing the word. Our baby. You're certain? As certain as I can be this early. Maria says all the signs are there, and she's helped deliver enough babies to know. Lila searched his face anxiously. Are you pleased? I know we hadn't specifically planned for this so soon, but… Pleased? Cole interrupted, pulling her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. Lila, I'm terrified and ecstatic and so full of love I can barely contain it. We're going to have a child. We're going to be parents. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Relief flooded through Lila, and she let herself relax into his embrace. I was afraid it might be too soon, that you might not be ready. I don't know if anyone's ever really ready, Cole said honestly, but I can't think of anything I want more than to build a family with you, to raise children who know they're loved, who grow up watching their parents choose each other every day, who understand that good things are worth fighting for. Our children are going to be so loved, Lila whispered, so completely, absolutely loved. Spring arrived with the kind of explosive beauty that made Wyoming territory feel like paradise. The snow melted in rushing torrents, wildflowers carpeted the hills, and construction began on the house Lila and Cole had designed. They spent weekends at the building site, watching their dreams take physical form. The wide front porch, the east-facing kitchen windows, the library with floor-to-ceiling shelves, the spacious bedrooms for the children they'd fill it with. As Lila's pregnancy became visible, the ranch community rallied around them with the kind of support that reminded her why she'd chosen this life. Maria knitted tiny sweaters and caps. The ranch hands built a beautiful wooden cradle as a wedding gift, and Donovan quietly set aside a college fund for his future godchild. This baby is going to be so spoiled, Lila said one afternoon in late May, as yet another gift arrived. This one a handmade quilt from Mrs. Hendricks covered in tiny horses and stars. Good, Cole said, his hand resting possessively on her rounded belly. After everything we've been through to get here, this child deserves to be celebrated. By July, the house was finished, a beautiful two-story structure that looked like it had grown naturally from the land. Moving day was orchestrated chaos, with ranch hands hauling furniture and boxes, while Lila, now heavy with child, directed traffic from a comfortable chair on the porch. You're supposed to be resting, Maria scolded, bringing her water and fanning her with a newspaper. I'm resting, Lila protested. I'm sitting down, aren't I? I'm just also making sure our books end up in the library instead of the kitchen. Stubborn woman, Maria muttered, but she was smiling. That baby's going to have your stubbornness and Cole's loyalty. Lord help us all. That night, their first night in their new home, Lila and Cole lay in their bed, a beautiful oak four-poster that Donovan had commissioned as a housewarming gift, and listened to the sounds of their house settling around them. We did it, Lila said softly, Cole's hand warm on her belly where their baby moved and kicked. We built this. Against all odds, despite everything that tried to stop us, we built a home and a life and a future. You built it, Cole corrected. You fought for my exoneration. You stood by me when everyone said you shouldn't. You refused to let either of us settle for less than we deserved. This house, this life, this family we're creating, it's all because you had the courage to believe it was possible. We both had courage, Lila said. You had the courage to help a stranger when you could have ridden on, to accept love when you thought you didn't deserve it, to hope for a future when all evidence suggested you'd never have one. Don't diminish your own role in this, Cole Mercer. You're just as responsible for our happiness as I am. Cole kissed her temple, her cheek, her lips. Then let's agree we're both stubborn, courageous people who got incredibly lucky to find each other. Agreed, Lila whispered, already drifting toward sleep with her husband's arms around her and her baby moving beneath her heart. Now, let's get some rest. We've got a whole life ahead of us, and I have a feeling it's going to be an adventure. The baby came on a snowy night in late December, almost exactly a year after Lila and Cole's wedding. Labor began late in the afternoon with subtle contractions that Lila initially dismissed as the usual aches and pains of late pregnancy. By evening, they'd intensified to the point where even she had to admit something was happening. Cole sent Tommy racing to fetch Maria and the midwife from town, while he paced the bedroom like a caged animal, alternating between holding Lila's hand and standing at the window, watching for help to arrive. "Stop pacing," Lila gasped between contractions. "You're making me nervous." "I'm making you nervous? You're the one having a baby." Cole ran his hands through his hair, making it stand on end. What if something goes wrong? What if the midwife can't make it through the snow? What if... Cole. Lila caught his hand and squeezed hard. "I need you calm. I need you strong. I need you to remember that women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and we're remarkably good at it. Now sit down, hold my hand, and tell me about the horses you're planning to breed in the spring." Cole sat, took a deep breath, and began talking about bloodlines and temperaments and training philosophies. His voice steadied as he spoke, and Lila focused on the familiar rumble of it, using it as an anchor against the pain and fear. Maria and the midwife arrived just as full labor set in, and they took over with the calm competence of women who'd done this dozens of times. Cole was banished to the hallway, where Donovan found him an hour later, sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. "She's strong," Donovan said, settling onto the floor beside him. "She's going to be fine, and so is the baby." "You can't know that," Cole said raggedly. "Things go wrong. Women die in childbirth all the time. If I lose her—" "You won't," Donovan said firmly. "Have faith, son. Have faith in Lila's strength, in Maria's skill, in the fact that you two have overcome every other obstacle life has thrown at you. This is just one more challenge, and you'll face it the way you faced everything else, together." It was a long night, full of waiting and worry and the sounds of labor that Cole was powerless to ease. But finally, as the first light of dawn painted the windows pink and gold, a baby's cry split the air, strong and loud and absolutely perfect. Maria opened the door, tears streaming down her face. "It's a girl, Cole. A healthy, beautiful baby girl. And Lila's fine, tired but fine. She's asking for you." Cole stumbled into the bedroom to find Lila propped against pillows, sweaty and exhausted, and more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the smallest, most perfect creature he'd ever laid eyes on, their daughter, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that were trying valiantly to focus on her mother's face. "Come meet your daughter," Lila said softly, her voice hoarse but full of joy. "Come meet Grace." "Grace," Cole repeated, moving to the bed as if in a dream. "We decided on Grace?" "After my mother," Lila said. "I thought about naming her after my father, but Grace seemed right. A reminder that good things can come after terrible loss, that love can bloom even in the harshest circumstances." Cole sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Lila placed their daughter in his arms. Grace made a small sound of protest at the transfer, then settled, her tiny hand curling around Cole's finger with surprising strength. "Hello, Grace," Cole whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm your father. I'm going to love you and protect you and make sure you grow up knowing you're cherished. I'm going to teach you to ride and read and think for yourself. I'm going to show you that good men exist and that love is worth fighting for and that courage matters more than comfort." "We're going to show her all of that," Lila corrected gently, "together, the way we do everything else." Cole looked from his daughter to his wife, both of them safe and healthy, and his, and felt something in his chest expand until it felt like his heart might burst from the sheer magnitude of what he was feeling. "I love you," he said, though the words felt inadequate for what he was experiencing. "Both of you. More than I knew it was possible to love anything." "We love you too," Lila whispered. "Our family. Our beautiful, hard-won family." The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and the steep learning curve of new parenthood. Grace was a vigorous baby with a healthy set of lungs and definite opinions about when she wanted to eat and sleep. Lila and Cole stumbled through those first weeks with the kind of exhausted determination that marked all worthy endeavors, learning how to change diapers and soothe colicky crying and function on minimal sleep. But through it all ran a current of profound joy. Joy at watching Grace discover the world with wide, wondering eyes. Joy at seeing Cole transform into a gentle, attentive father who could calm their daughter with nothing but his voice and his steady presence. Joy at the simple miracle of their family gathered together in the home they'd built, living the life they'd fought so hard to claim. On a clear afternoon in early March, when Grace was 3 months old and starting to smile at her parents with intentional recognition, Lila stood on their front porch holding her daughter while Cole worked with horses in the nearby corral. The spring sun was warm on her face, and she could smell the first hints of wildflowers on the wind. Grace cooed in her arms, one tiny hand batting at Lila's face, and Lila felt her heart overflow with gratitude for this moment, this life. These people who'd become her whole world. Cole glanced over from the corral, saw them watching, and smiled. That full, unguarded smile that still took Lila's breath away, even after more than a year of marriage. He finished with the horse, vaulted the fence with easy athleticism, and crossed the yard to join them on the porch. "What are my two favorite girls doing?" he asked, dropping a kiss on Grace's head and then on Lila's lips. "Watching you work and counting our blessings," Lila said. "Grace wanted to remind you that she's going to be an expert rider someday, and you should probably start preparing appropriate horses now." "Is that what she said?" Cole took Grace from Lila's arms, holding her up so they were eye to eye. "You want to be a rider like your old man? Well, we'll start you on a gentle pony when you're about 2, work you up to something with more spirit by 5. By the time you're 10, you'll be the best horsewoman in Wyoming territory." Grace responded by grabbing his nose and babbling something that might have been agreement or might have been a demand for food. Cole laughed, the sound rich and full and completely free of the shadows that had once darkened it. "I can't believe this is our life," he said, settling onto the porch steps with Grace in his lap. "A year and a half ago, I was a wanted man who'd given up on happiness. Now I'm sitting on my own porch, holding my daughter, married to the most extraordinary woman I've ever met. It feels like something I dreamed up, not reality." "It's real," Lila assured him, sitting beside him and resting her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself too, but it's absolutely real. We built this, Cole. Out of grief and injustice and impossible odds, we built something beautiful and true." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun track across the sky and Grace slowly drift toward sleep in her father's arms. In the distance, Lila could see Donovan riding in from the far pastures, could hear the sounds of the ranch settling into evening routines, could smell dinner cooking as Maria worked in their kitchen. "You know what I think about sometimes," Cole said quietly. "I think about that day I found you behind the wagon. How easily I could have ridden past, could have decided it wasn't my problem, could have let fear of recognition keep me from stopping. And if I had, I would have missed all of this. You, Grace, this life we've built. It terrifies me to think how close I came to losing everything that matters because I was afraid." "But you didn't ride past," Lila reminded him. "You stopped. You helped. You chose courage over fear, connection over isolation. That's what makes you who you are, Cole. The man who stops when others would ride on, who helps when it would be easier to look away, who chooses love, even when it's complicated and difficult." "You chose the same things," Cole pointed out. "You could have accepted any number of easier paths, stayed in Missouri, married someone safe and respectable, lived a quiet life without complications. But you chose adventure and challenge and a man with a wanted poster. That took courage, too." "We've both been brave," Lila agreed, "and we've both been rewarded for it. This life, this family, it's better than anything I dreamed of back when my father and I were heading west. Better than the safe, predictable future he'd hoped to give me." Cole shifted Grace carefully to one arm and wrapped the other around Lila, pulling her close. "Your father would be proud of you, of the woman you've become, the life you've built, the courage you've shown. I wish he could have met Grace, could have seen how his sacrifice led to all of this." "I think he knows," Lila said softly. "Somehow, wherever he is, I think he knows his daughter found love and safety and a future worth living. I think he sees his granddaughter and smiles, knowing the dream he had for me came true in ways he never could have predicted." They sat together on their porch as the sun set over the Wyoming hills. 3 people who'd found each other through tragedy and built something lasting from the ashes of loss. Inside their house, books lined the library shelves and Grace's cradle sat ready in the nursery. In the corrals, horses stamped and whinnied, waiting for tomorrow's training. And across the ranch, people who'd become family went about their evening routines, building their own lives in this harsh and beautiful country. This was the life Lila's father had wanted for her, not the specific details of it, but the essence. Love that sustained rather than constrained. Work that mattered. Courage that transformed fear into possibility. A home built not on what had been lost, but on what had been found. As Grace stirred and woke, demanding attention with her usual vigor, Lila took her daughter from Cole's arms and looked into those eyes that were starting to shift from newborn blue to something that might become her father's storm cloud gray. "You turned a stranger into a home," she whispered to Cole, echoing words he'd spoken to her on their wedding night. "You turned grief into joy, fear into courage, impossible into inevitable. You showed me that happy endings aren't fairy tales. They're what happens when people refuse to give up on each other or themselves." Cole stood and pulled both his girls into his arms, holding them close as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. "We showed each other," he corrected. "Every step of the way we showed each other that love is worth fighting for, that justice matters, that broken things can be made whole." And there, on the porch of their home in the Wyoming Territory, with their daughter between them and their future stretching out wide and bright and full of promise, Lila and Cole Mercer held each other close and believed, completely, absolutely, without reservation, that the best was yet to come. Their story had begun with a gunshot and a grave and a stranger who stopped when he could have ridden on. It had been tested by injustice and grief and the harsh realities of frontier life, but it had endured, had thrived, had transformed into something more beautiful than either of them had dared to dream. And as Grace babbled between them, reaching for the first stars appearing overhead, Lila thought about her father's final word to her, "Live," and knew with certainty that she was doing exactly that. Living fully, loving completely, building a future worthy of all the courage it had taken to claim it. The story that had started in blood and fear and desperate survival had become something else entirely, a story of love and hope and the kind of happiness that could only be earned through struggle and sacrifice and refusing to surrender to despair. It was, Lila thought, as Cole kissed her temple and Grace grabbed her father's finger with determined strength, exactly the ending her father would have wanted for her, and exactly the beginning she and Cole had fought so hard to claim.